If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What is your scariest humanoid creature sighting, creepy alien encounter, UFO sighting, abduction, or otherworldly experience?
So many stories, so little time. Here's a true story that happened to me when I was a kid. I've only told 2 people in my life. Not even my parents. I grew up very rural, in a trailer on a tobacco farm beside a man-made lake. I always say man-made because I feel something happens when you disturb the land. Anyway, many things happened to me there, but this one I can't stop thinking and wondering about. I was about 7 to 8. I had moved my bed to be next to my door, away from the window where the scratching always came from. I was asleep with my head kind of hanging off the bed slightly upside down. So my head was kind of in the doorway to the hall, if that makes sense. At some point I open my eyes, and there is a glowing green man, thing, or alien within inches of my face, and because I was sleeping crooked/upside down, my mouth had been open. He was holding his mouth in the shape that I was holding mine. He was copying me. That's when I realized we were both upside down. I was still lying with my head facing into the hallway, and he was in the hallway and had turned himself upside down so that we would be face to face, literally. He didn't hurt me. I feel I scared him as much as he scared me because he left. I have no idea how he left because by then I was underneath my blanket. I've heard it said by someone whose whole lineage had stories of alien abduction that once it starts, it never ever stops. I didn't know if I was or ever had been abducted. But I still think of that green man and wonder if he still watches me. This event occurred when I was around 9 years old. My friend and I were playing in my room with Barbies but took a quick break when she had to pee. I decided it would be fun to hide behind my door to scare her. When I stood up and wanted to hide behind my door, I saw some sort of creature. I always thought of it as some sort of alien, but it could be something else. It for sure did not look human, though. I don't know how it looked exactly but have a vague memory of how it looked. This is because it was so long ago. When I saw it, I felt intense fear. I could not move or breathe, and my heart was going crazy. I don't know for how long I stood there, but eventually I walked out of my room, and my friend came out of the bathroom. We both went inside my room and went to play again. At that moment I did not remember what happened but still felt petrified. I must have looked scared too because she kept asking me if I was okay. I'm not sure when, but maybe a few days or weeks later, I started to remember what happened that day and got extremely scared to sleep. I never told my parents and kept it to myself. They just had to deal with me being scared lamau. I told my little brother a few years after it happened, but every time I talked about it or every time he would joke about it, he didn't believe me. I would freak out, and this intense fear would fill up my body. The picture of it standing there and the fear I felt stayed with me. I recently talked about it with my oldest brother because my younger one brought it up as a joke. My oldest brother really believes it could be an alien of some sort, since he also believes he saw one when he was younger. Does anyone have the same experience or any idea what this could have been? My great-great-grandfather never heard of aliens but swore he saw little men in the forest coming out of big rotating plates with lights. This happened around the 1900s, in the countryside of southern Brazil. My grandmother's grandfather was coming home from a ball, the parties they had in the early days, very late at night. He lived on a small farm, and so to come from the party place, he had to walk a long way in the middle of nothing, just trees and bushes, and well, you can imagine how the countryside of Brazil was back then. He said that while he was walking, all of a sudden he heard strong noises and saw lights. Scared, he hid behind bushes to see what was happening. He said there were very few men speaking a language he could not understand, and behind them, huge plates were stacked above one another with lights all over them. He stayed hiding and praying in the bushes until they left. He ran for his life after that. My grandma says she heard this story a few times in her youth from him. Always the same narrative and him praying after. Only after she married, moved to the big city, and had children was when she heard people talking about these alien things. And all so similar to the descriptions of what her grandfather told her. She is a very religious woman who only believes in what the Bible says, except aliens. Alien type thing. I still have no idea if this is something that actually happened or if I was hallucinating. Either way, it was terrifying. It happened a few months ago. I was in bed at night sleeping when I remember feeling this intense type of dread. Of course I woke up at some point, and I still felt the dread. I felt like something awful was happening. It was one of the most terrifying things I ever felt and experienced. All I remember is I saw this thing that seemed like an alien in my room, and it was looking at me. I remember the creature seemed like it wanted me to follow it and go wherever it was going. Before I knew it, I had jumped out of bed, still terrified by what I had seen. At this point it was gone. There was no sign it had been there, and I never even saw it leave. I just remember walking to my mom's room and asking her to open the door, and she did. I told her what had happened minutes before, and I started to cry because of how shaken up I was. I never felt anything like it. Even my mom was scared because of what I was explaining. I didn't get any sleep the rest of the night except for an hour or two, and I kept my light on the entire time. It freaks me out because if what I saw wasn't real, it must have been a hallucination. I don't know what else it could have been. It felt incredibly real, but I don't know if it was. I don't know why I would be experiencing hallucinations because I've never had them before. The overwhelming sense of dread was another horrifying part of what had happened that night. Has anyone else had an experience like this? Might have been an alien encounter. I'll let you decide. When I was about 10, I went with my family on holiday at a camping site, but instead of tents they had small wood houses for rent, very cheap, kind of like cabins. Everything was fun, we had some friends there too. In the evening, my parents were sleepy, and they wanted me to sleep too, but I was just like now, the type of person who hates sleeping early, so I kept my eyes open and stared at the ceiling for an hour until I saw a huge light outside and walked to the door window and stared through it. I realize this part may sound strange, and I hope you can understand it better than I do. My parents woke up and stood silently behind me, also staring through the window. Outside, people were just getting out of the cabins and stared at the light source. It was very dark, so I can't really describe the shape of that thing. All of the people were looking up and stood still like my parents, no sound, nothing. A few minutes later, the light just turned off, so to say, and I could see everyone going back inside and my parents back to bed. The next day, nobody remembered anything, claiming they slept all night without waking up at all. I know of another person who experienced something very similar during those years, but it happened on a train. He was the same age as me, and nobody else remembered anything about it except him. I wasn't dreaming or imagining it. My parents didn't allow me to watch horror movies, so I didn't think much of it until I first read about aliens and ghosts and so on. A woman runs over a humanoid with her car. Suomeniemi, Eastern Finland, June 25, 1992. It was 9 o'clock on a summer evening in June, and a 54-year-old woman was on her way to her vacation cottage in Ristiina. It was dusk, and she was driving on a narrow country road through the forest. Along the road, there were mostly pine trees, green birch forests, and undergrowth such as grass and bushes. Now and then she drove past a few residential houses along the road, and she did not meet many other cars. After a long straightaway, there was a curve up a hill. As she came over the crest, she detected movement on the road in front of her in the low light from the car. She thought it was some animal, but as she got closer, she saw that it was two small creatures, who seemed to be busy measuring or analyzing something on the road. The first was squatting in the middle of the road, and the second was crouched by the side of it. They were so focused on their work that they didn't even notice the approaching car until it was very close to them. When they discovered the car, the humanoid at the side of the road jumped into the ditch, while the other being in the middle of the road froze. The woman didn't have time to stop and drove right over him while trying to steer away so as not to hit him. When she drove over the humanoid, she heard a whining sound similar to "nii-oo" under the car. She braked the car and got out to investigate, but there was no sign of the creature she ran over. She also looked in the ditches but could not find anything. The only thing she saw was a piece of plastic from the car lying on the road. It had torn away from the underside. The woman later described the humanoids as small creatures that resembled humans but were distinctly different. They were between 60 centimeters and 90 centimeters tall, 2 to 3 feet. Their heads were round, and they seemed to have no hair. They also had large dark eyes or eye sockets. On the body, they were dressed in tight gray overalls with black belts around the waist. This is yet another of the strange humanoid sightings in Karelia, the eastern part of Finland. And as usual, small, short, bald creatures with large black eyes are often sighted, and they bear similarities in appearance to many other cases from around the world. So was it a typical gray that the woman ran over? Or was it something else? Or just an animal, and she saw wrong? But if it was an animal, shouldn't it have remained on the road? Like many other cases with only one witness, evidence is lacking, and unfortunately we only have the witness's account to go by. And we can only choose to believe their story or not. The shadow in the woods. The event happened a couple days ago, and I still don't know what to think of it. I was outside at about 8:30 with two of my friends. Since it's fall, it was completely dark out, and the only light we had was our phone flashlights and a very dull back porch light. We were walking around and goofing off. Earlier in the day we were sharing some scary stories, so in this situation we were a little on edge. My friend C and I kept looking over to this swing in my front yard and almost expected something to walk in front of it, but through the night every time we checked, nothing was there. After a bit of time being outside, we all walk over to the back porch, about to go sit on it, when I see something in the woods. It looked like a woman that was pretty average height with long, stick-straight hair, and that's all I could make out. I told my friends, and we started looking to see if it was still there. It wasn't. Where I live there are a lot of deer, so I just assumed I saw a deer that was just standing weird. But throughout the night I couldn't get it out of my head. We went back outside later that night and heard scratching near us, but it didn't sound like anything an animal could make. It freaked us out, but we didn't make much of it. In the morning I looked at the spot I saw it in, and there was nothing that could make that shadow. Realistically it was nothing, but I can't get rid of this feeling that I really saw something. Side note, things similar to this have happened before in and around my house, but nothing ever that clear. Dad says he saw gray aliens, and then weird shit happened. At the start of COVID, during the 2-week lockdown, my dad, very concerned, said, "Frank, please don't think I'm crazy. I swear I saw 3 gray aliens walking across the street, and then they went into the woods." Asked him how tall, he said very skinny creatures, about 4 feet tall. 2 days later, I am not joking, a military person skydived into their community. I witnessed it while we were driving back into the neighborhood, and we were like, what the actual F? White vans running in and out of the neighborhood non-stop. I would witness them a minimum of 20 to 30 times daily. Something happened that was far beyond COVID. To add to all this, about a month later my dad randomly leaves the house while I'm visiting, saying he wants to go be with God. He's completely at peace, acting totally normal, leaves the house, and walks down the street. Cops pick him up. Cops call me, and when I'm on the phone with the cop, he says, "Hang on real quick," and then I hear, "Oh, SHT, SHT." And then a loud gunshot. At this point I'm panicking, thinking that my dad was shot. A totally different cop gets on the phone. I had not talked to this guy. The officer said, "Sorry, that was unrelated, your dad is fine, and we will bring him home." In that moment I literally thought to myself, was the original cop I talked to shot and replaced? Did he see one of those grays and have to shoot it? He spoke in a voice filled with complete panic. The next cop on the phone was completely fine, as if nothing had happened. Dad comes home with them and instead says he wants to go check himself into a hotel for a few days. So they offer to drive him to the hotel. Dad turns off his phone, won't let anyone come visit, and has no communication with us during this time. He says he wants to be alone. He comes back home after a few days as if nothing happened, and to this day, he says, "I don't want to talk about what happened that night." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it was weird. Like, can you explain what happened and why you felt that way?" And he's just like, "Nah, I would rather not get into it." I think he saw something, or something serious happened, and he's concerned that if he says something, he'll be labeled insane. What are your thoughts on this? I genuinely became frightened, thinking that they had replaced my dad with someone else. The gray alien thing was super weird. And it was really weird to hear a loud gunshot on the phone, and then suddenly I'm speaking to a different cop. I remember when the cops came by the house to drop him off, their demeanor was incredibly weird. Almost like they were non-human. They just didn't act right. Not so alone anymore. So I live with my girlfriend and her uncle in a family-owned house in the middle of the state of Missouri. Every night her uncle goes outside for a cigarette, at about 1 a.m., and we all talk about the day or just other various things, but there's usually a sense of being uneasy throughout us. We have a basement that no one goes into, ever, but we always hear noises down there or around the house. I'm the one that always stays up the latest, so I'm always paranoid due to the unusual happenings here. One night I was watching South Park at around 1 a.m., and I went to get a soda from the fridge, and I heard a noise by the sink, so I looked out the window above it, and I saw 2 tall beings. I'd say about 7 or 8 feet. Just inspecting the area around it, it looks so natural that my heart starts racing, and then one of them looks in my direction and just stares at me. I make the first move and wake up her uncle. He has a shotgun, so he heads outside where I sat and looks at the area but finds nothing. To this day it haunts my memory. Whether it was aliens or not, it was still pretty frightening. Owl Hollow. I honestly don't know why I'm even writing this. It's not like anyone's going to believe me anyway. Maybe it's just to get it out of my head. Maybe it's some kind of warning. I don't know. Last October, I went hiking alone near Mount Hood. I was trying to get away from everything, work, noise, and people. I found this spot on an old Forest Service map called Owl Hollow, near Jordan Creek. Sounded perfect. Secluded, quiet. Barely even mentioned online. The first few hours were fine. Peaceful, even. All I could hear was the sound of the creak and the crunch of my boots on the gravel. It felt good. Like I could breathe again. But sometime in the afternoon, that feeling started creeping in. You know the one. Like somebody's watching you. At first, I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being stupid. Big woods, alone, of course you're going to feel jumpy. But it kept getting worse. Around 3 p.m. I looked off the trail into the trees, and there was a pair of eyes staring at me through the brush. Not blinking. Just watching. It wasn't a deer. I know what deer look like. This was different. Lower to the ground. Wrong shape. There was absolutely no sound. I kept hiking. Probably faster than I should have. About an hour later, I came around a bend, and there they were. A man and a woman standing in the middle of the trail. I don't know how to explain it, everything about them just felt off immediately. Their clothes looked strange, as if they had just stepped out of an old photograph. Faded colors, stiff fabric, almost dusty. I tried to say hello, maybe ask if they needed help, but my voice just kind of died. They didn't say anything either. Just stared. And when they passed me, they both turned their heads at the same time and smiled. I can't even describe it right. It wasn't human. Their mouths stretched far too wide, and their teeth were wrong. Sharp and dirty. And their eyes turned black. Not like dark irises black. Like bottomless pits. I almost threw up. I almost ran. But they just kept walking like nothing had happened, disappearing into the woods behind me. I should have left right then. I should have found a way around them and sprinted back to my truck, never looking back. But I didn't. I kept going. Dumbass. By the time I set up camp that night, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the tent up. It didn't matter. I wasn't sleeping anyway. As the sun went down, the woods around me got wrong. Too quiet. No birds. No bugs. Nothing but the creak and the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. Then I started seeing them. First one. Then two. Then more. 17 or 18 of them, crouched in the trees, peeking from behind rocks, half buried in the tall grass. All with the same twisted smiles. All with those black eyes. I sat there by the fire, clutching my pistol, feeling like I was going to pass out from terror. They didn't move. They didn't get closer. They just watched. I don't know what snapped, but I stood up and fired 2 shots straight into the air. The sound echoed through the trees, sharp and painful. They didn't even flinch. That's when I ran. I grabbed my pack and ran like my life depended on it, because honestly, I think it did. I don't remember getting back to the car. I don't even remember driving home. I only remember slamming the door behind me and then sitting in the dark for hours, shaking with the gun still in my hand. I haven't told anybody until now. People would think I'm crazy. Hell, I think I'm crazy sometimes when I replay it in my head. But I know what I saw. And I'm telling you, if you ever find yourself near Owl Hollow, turn around. Get out while you can. Some places are better off forgotten. The boxy, Luminous being at the side of the road. Husum, Mideast, Sweden, January 1959. The observer was the then 62-year-old factory owner Gottfrid Olsson. It was just after 10 p.m. on a Saturday night in early 1959. It was almost bedtime, and Gottfrid walked past one of the windows in his house and happened to look out into the darkness. Then he saw something strange. A short distance from the house at the side of the Riks 13 highway, he saw a luminous object the size of a person. But it was no ordinary human, but it still reminded him a little of one. It was about the same length and width as an ordinary person, but that's where the similarities ended. The creature's body was luminous, and its shoulders were clearly marked, as was the lower part of its body, which had straight and angular lines. Its body was more box-like than that of a human, according to the observer. Its head was more diffused than the rest of its body and cloudy at the edges, blending into the background. For 3 to 4 minutes, the creature stood still in exactly the same place by the roadside, and throughout, it radiated a strong red-white glow, except for a narrow, vertical blue-colored central stripe on its body. Suddenly, Gottfrid Olsson saw a flash of lightning from the creature, and then it was gone. I never had time to see where it went, it was just gone, he told the newspaper in Holtzvik Leanda. I remember beings coming to me in my childhood who resembled taller gray alien stereotypes. My mom's friend, a psychic, called them watchers. The main one had a name. Gung Gung. So one of my earliest memories is of a hallway opening up in my bedroom wall at night, and a tall, thin, gangly, white skin being coming through and saying, "Hey buddy," and I don't remember anything after that. I specifically wasn't afraid, and it didn't feel ominous. In another early memory, I'm sitting in my backyard, looking at my house, specifically my bedroom window, from the outside while I was playing in the grass. I remember thinking, strange. How does a hallway open up in this wall? It happened often enough that I actually was gung for Halloween one year. Once I could talk, my parents just brushed it off as imaginary musings typical of children that age. One day, in a Blockbuster video, back when they were still a huge deal, I was walking with my dad, and I guess I grabbed his leg to get his attention and silently pointed at a picture of a book or movie, I can't remember which, called Communion, and then pointed straight up at the sky, all while making this noise I used to make before I could talk and after I learned to speak but wanted to draw attention to something. Sort of like My mom's friend, who is a psychic, told me when she did a pro bono reading for me that, "Oh my god. You have watchers," I said, what? And she proceeded to ask if I have any strange childhood memories. She didn't know the story prior to the reading, so this really floored me, and I told her, and we both sat there and all like, defuke? So I'm gonna start off by saying that I'm quite nervous to share this, as I feel like I'll get killed by the government or some shit. But I remember, like 4/5 years ago, I was walking outside with my cousin. We were out for around half an hour until we looked up and spotted something in the sky. There were 3 red dots moving around. They were very bright, as it was very dark outside. They were moving very slowly at first, but as we got a closer look at it, it shot off at an insanely inhuman speed. I and my cousin both looked at each other confused as to what it was. I am also a big believer in alien/extraterrestrial life because of this event. After it shot off, we tried to find it again because we were intrigued as to what it was. After about 10 minutes of looking, we came across these concrete steps near my home, and we sat on them trying to look for these lights. And I can say this hand on my heart, this is so ducking true. As we looked up, I became convinced that the object hovering a couple of meters above us was a UFO. We both ran in absolute fear trying to get away from it. We ran to a little arch and stayed there until we thought it was safe to come back out. I haven't seen the UFO since. Every time I go out, I think about what could happen if I see it again. And I remember my cousin going missing for, 5 minutes, and I couldn't find her anywhere. And when I found her, she told me she doesn't even remember wandering off. Creepy shit, right? But the weirdest thing about all of this is that we both saw completely different shapes of this UFO. I saw a circle, whereas she saw a rectangle. But, in all honesty, it was too ducking close to even think about what kind of shape it was. I still sit there and think about what it could have been. I've only told a small handful of people, as I'm very paranoid about all of this UFO shit and aliens. But I felt like I needed to share my experience. Feel free to let me know if anyone has had any similar experiences. I cannot determine whether this experience was bad or good, what the object's intention might have been, or even if there was any life associated with the object. It still scares me today. I also tried speaking to my dad about it, and he just brushed it off like it was nothing. The small handful of people who I've told say they believe me, but I think they just think I'm some sort of insane person, but I can swear this is a true story. I don't think it's something I can just make up, and neither could my cousin. A white humanoid creature without a face. When I was about 12 years old, I remember going to a forest in our city with my mother. We were going to get some berries or such. We went there on a motorcycle, she was driving, and I was sitting behind her. She stopped the vehicle and went behind a bush to get berries. I was sitting on the motorcycle while she was picking the berries, and I remember looking around. I looked at a tree that was very thin, like an old tree that would fall if wind blew on it. I saw a white humanoid creature. It didn't have any facial features, just a plain white face. It didn't have any clothing. Either it stood on top of the tree with one hand holding it, or, how could I describe it? It stood on a thin branch just staring at me, and then it jumped off the tree like it was nothing. I then covered my eyes and started calling for my mother to leave the place. I haven't seen the creature since, but I remember that I was frightened. I wonder what it was. That is why I decided to write this, hoping to find out if anyone else has had a similar experience or knows what the creature might be. It happened in Slovakia. Thank you for any feedback. Winged humanoids on the road. Lahala village, Western Finland, December 14, 1972. During the first years of the 1970s, many strange humanoid sightings were made in Finland, such as the goblin-like creature in Imjärvi, the Kanula Ufonaut, the little man in northern Finland and Sweden, the boy who saw humanoids on the roof of his house and then got abducted by a claw-equipped saucer, the mysterious driver of the black car in Turku, the musician Pauli Niirinen's nightly meeting with humanoids, the snowplow man and the being in the UFO, and other fascinating cases. This is another Finnish report on aliens from this time. It was 2:30 a.m. on this December night in 1972, and farmer Veikko Kivioja was returning home in his car after visiting a neighbor, Seppo Oja, who lived a few kilometers away. After he had driven 1.5 kilometers, approximately 1 mile, on winding and snowy forest roads, he rounded another curve, and in front of him suddenly he saw 3 points of light on the left side of the road. He thought the lights were from another car coming towards him on the narrow road, so he slowed down and stopped his car to get a better look. Veikko now saw that the 3 lights were actually 3 human-like beings, and there was a strange shimmer of light coming from them. The 3 humanoids were heading across the road in front of him towards a logging clearing on the right side of the road. The creatures had round heads, but Veikko could not see any facial features. He also saw that they had wing-like arms, which rested against their hips when they walked. The legs were clearly visible, and they seemed to walk softly and easily. Veikko Kivioja now decided to go back to his neighbor Seppo Oja, bringing another witness with him. He drove his car forward a little in order to turn it around, and as he did so, the headlights turned on the creatures. He noticed that they were completely ignoring him, as if they didn't see him at all. He drove quickly along the winding road, and when he reached the neighbor's house again, he honked like a madman to get the attention of Seppo, who came out and wondered what had happened. Veikko told him, and the neighbor followed, even though he didn't believe him and thought it sounded quite ridiculous. But when they got back to the clearing next to the road, Seppo realized it wasn't made up. The creatures were still there, and now they were heading for a small hill about 100 meters, 110 yards, away. The 2 men could also see a glowing sphere that completely enveloped the creatures, and it moved at the same speed as the creatures went. The light from the sphere was so strong that it completely brightened up the surrounding forest, and the trees were clearly visible. After 10 minutes the light faded away, and the forest became dark again. The creatures were also gone. A short time afterwards, the 2 men dared to get out of the car, and they walked over to the hill to see if they could see any traces of the creatures. But unfortunately they couldn't find anything. About 4 to 5 hours after the 2 men's encounter, dairy farmer Haimo Matila was out driving his tractor on another road about 10 kilometers, 6.2 miles, away. It was still quite dark outside. Suddenly he saw a very bright light coming from the right side of the road about 100 meters, 110 yards, away. It turned out to be a spherical object about 2 meters, 6 feet, in diameter, emitting a bright green light. The light orb flew towards the road about 1 to 2 meters, 3 to 6 feet, above the ground, at the same speed as a human walking, and it gracefully avoided all obstacles in the terrain in front of it. Haimo gassed his tractor and drove forward as fast as he could, and the object crossed the road right behind him. As he drove, he could see the green orb of light behind him in the rearview mirror. The question you ask yourself after listening the story of Heiko and Seppo and their encounter with the humanoids. Since they had spent the evening together. Were both men really sober? Or did they look too deep into the vodka bottle this evening? Yes, it's not entirely unbelievable. But they may also have seen something really strange. Who knows? And the farmer Haimo also saw something unusual that morning, which somewhat confirms their story. Saw a 6 feet plus pure black humanoid figure. So at the time I was 16, and I lived in an apartment above a restaurant. So when you would walk in the door of the apartment, you would be greeted by a set of stairs, and when you would get to the top, you could either go left, which would lead you to the living room and kitchen/dining room, or go right, which would lead you to the bedrooms and bathroom. So I'm just relaxing in my room while the rest of my family is together in the living room. It's a little past noon when I decide to leave my room and join the rest of my family, and that's when I turn the corner of the small hallway with all the bedrooms. When I round the corner, I'm greeted by a 6 feet plus pure black figure standing right at the top of the stairs. About a second after seeing it, I couldn't move my body, and we were just staring at one another for what I think was about 7 to 15 seconds, but it felt longer than that. I would also like to say that I wasn't frozen with fear because I felt none, not even to this day, but I think my brain was having a hard time processing what I was seeing, or this thing just held me in place with something, So anyways, after just looking at each other for a bit, it just kind of floated up a bit from the ground and went headfirst into my chest, giving me a light shove, and it was gone. I was able to move freely right after, and I went to my family, telling them what just happened, and they looked at me with faces of concern and disbelief. So that's my story, and I would appreciate your opinion on what you think I saw. The Spacemen on the Mountain. Norway at Hardangervidda, October 1992. A strange craft landed at a cabin near Odda in the fall of 1992. This place is about 800 meters, 2,500 feet, above sea level at Hardangervidda, which is a famous bare mountain region in western Norway. It was October, and the snow had not yet arrived. At dusk on this day, observer Torbjorn Riensnøs, TR, saw an object land about 100 meters, 300 feet, from his cabin. It appeared to be 6 to 8 meters, 18 to 24 feet, wide and trapezoidal in shape. After a short while, he saw two humanoid beings emerge from the ship. They appeared to be a little shorter than humans, about 1.4 meters, 4 feet, 7 in, tall. The creatures had silver-colored tight clothes and helmets on their heads. One of them also carried a black device, but it was not possible to see what it was. TR had plenty of time to observe both ships and beings through the binoculars. But pretty soon he started to get anxious and therefore sent a warning shot at the beings with his shotgun. They got scared and quickly disappeared into the ship through a hatch. The ship took off and flew away over Lake Riensnøsvatnet, a kilometer, 0.6 miles, away. There it turned and then came back and hovered over Torbjorn's cabin. After a short while, the ship flew back towards the lake, then ascended towards Middle's Peak, and finally disappeared. The next day, TR investigated the landing site. He had two neighbors with him, father and son, as witnesses. They found 4 footprints in the ground, which they believed to be from the craft's landing gears. Where the prints were, the ground was also white with frost, and this would remain for a long time. The imprints from the landing gears were visible until the following spring and summer, and then UFO Norway was supposed to come there and take samples. Earlier in the winter, UFO Norway had received a report by telephone about the incident from TR. Then TR also promised that the UFO investigators would be allowed to come up to his land and look around and interview him as soon as the snow melted away. But unfortunately TR later changed its mind and did not want UFO Norway to come there. In fact, he didn't want to speak any more of the incident at all. So unfortunately there was not a scientific investigation of the ground or a follow-up, more in-depth interview about the encounter. Ghosts, alien abduction, sleep paralysis? A few years back my mother and I lived alone in a 2-floor apartment above a small pizza place. It had a bedroom downstairs and 2 upstairs. My mother never told me until we moved out, but an old man had died upstairs in her room. For many years I believe I've been followed by a spirit, who became much more aggressive during the time we lived there. I've always thought this spirit was under the impression of this old man who wanted us out of his home. There were many unexplainable occurrences there between all of us. My brother and sister would visit every other weekend before going back to their father. My brother would sleep in the room downstairs, my mother would sleep in the biggest one upstairs, and my sister and I took the one across from her. In our room, there was a large walk-in closet with a door immediately to the right when you walk into the room, then one bed on the far left corner, and another bed for me in the far right corner. The closet door and sometimes my bedroom door would always open during the night even though neither was malfunctioning or broken whatsoever. We tested this many times, but they only opened by themselves in the night. One morning I woke up to my sister asking me, "Did you say there were aliens last night?" I respond very confused, "No? What?" And she tells me this. I woke up late in the night and looked over to you sitting straight up in bed pointing towards the end of my bed saying, "Sister's name, look, there are aliens," and when I looked at the end of my bed, I saw 4 tiny black humanoid shadows get up from crouching and run across the room into the closet. Then I lost control of my body and quickly fell onto the bed and started shaking violently before passing out again. Mind you, when we woke up, the closet door was left open with the light on, and the bedroom door was open. The doors were closed and the lights were off when we went to sleep. That time I saw a crawling man with glowing red eyes on a rural Michigan roadside. This took place around 2005-ish while I was in college. This is a true story, no exaggeration, confirmed by the other party involved that my memory is accurate. My boyfriend at the time and I were driving through foggy rural Michigan on our way back from a show at a different college a few hours away. It was after midnight, and we were somewhere between Midland and Mount Pleasant. The farmland on either side of the road was dark and misty. We were tired but happy, chatting about the highlights of the show. We both stopped talking very suddenly, as we had simultaneously seen an odd shape up ahead, in the margins of the headlights on the right side of the road. "Is that a person?" I exclaimed. "Yeah, is that guy crawling out of the ditch?" my boyfriend asked. We slowed down a little to see if this was, in fact, a person needing help. As we got closer, the eerie shape became a little clearer, and we saw that it was definitely the shape of a human, crawling on hands and knees with head down. Right as we were approaching, the shape slowly lifted its head and looked up at us with huge glowing red eyes and a white face with no mouth. My boyfriend and I were stunned. He asked WTF we should do, and I told him to GTFO ASAP. We were both left with the feeling that we had absolutely seen something paranormal, possibly malevolent, but we thought we'd better call 911 anyway, just in case there was actually some kind of emergency. I called the cops on my Virgin Mobile Kyocera Oyster flip phone and explained what we had seen. The officer who responded to the call had called me back about an hour later and said he saw no emergencies on the roadside, so we were probably just seeing things. My boyfriend and I were so alarmed that we ultimately decided to remain at my parents' residence rather than return to our dormitories. This was 20 years ago, and I still recall it. Apparently, he remembers it too. When I recently asked him about the incident, he said it still keeps him up at night. Humanoid entities that attack 28-year-old Donald Shrum. September 4, 1964. On September 4, 1964, 28-year-old Donald Shrum and his friends were bow and arrow hunting at Cisco Grove, Placer County, California. Before very long, the avid hunter would have an encounter with the unknown, an encounter that would make this the most memorable hunting trip of his life. During the afternoon of hunting, Shrum had become separated from the rest of the group, and with nightfall fast approaching, he decided to sleep the night away in a tree for safety. His attention was soon drawn, however, to the sight of a white light that zigzagged through the trees at low altitude. At first, he thought it was a helicopter, so Shrum jumped down from the safety of the tree and began lighting flares to attract attention to himself. He thought that his friends had launched a rescue party to locate their missing companion. Finally, the white light turned in his direction, coming to a stop some 50 yards from the tree. He soon discovered that the object was not a helicopter at all but a strange-looking object, different from anything he had seen before. Now frightened, he climbed back up into the safety of the tree. After a short period of time, he was shocked to see 3 beings approaching the tree. 2 of them seemed to be a humanoid type of being, while the third was more robot-like. Shock became utter panic now, as the 3 began to shake the tree in an attempt to dislodge him. He vividly recalls a white vapor being shot from the robot's mouth, which rendered him unconscious. When he came to, he was nauseous but began throwing lighted matches toward the beings, which caused them to back away from the tree momentarily. Soon the assault continued. Finally, Shrum managed to load and shoot an arrow at the invaders, hitting the robot. The direct hit caused a spark to fly, indicating that the arrow had hit a metallic surface. He managed to shoot 2 more arrows at the beings, each time causing the group to scatter. Soon, another robot joined the group, and the strange, white vapor emanating from the entity's mouth once more rendered Shrum unconscious. When he awoke again, the 2 humanoid beings were now climbing the tree. He managed to thwart the attack by throwing different objects at them and shaking the tree. This scenario continued off and on for most of the night. As dawn approached, more beings arrived, and this time a large volume of smoke caused him to black out completely. When he awoke, he was barely hanging from the tree by his belt. The aliens were finally gone. Shrum was soon rescued and reunited with the other hunters. Corroborating at least part of his story, one of the other men had also become lost and seen the UFO. What exactly were these humanoid-like creatures that Shrum encountered that fearful night in California? Unfortunately, Donald Shrum was the only witness to these otherworldly beings. I need some help. I had a really strange night a few years ago, and things have gotten worse. It all started with a late-night trip with my brother and his friends. We left the house around 2 a.m. Dropped a friend off at their house to make room for my brother and me, and we left for Walmart. We grabbed some BBs for the airsoft guns and tried to buy some more spray paint, but because the 18-year-old friend had us minors with him, he was told he couldn't buy it. We then left for the skate park. We dicked around for a while, shot airsoft guns, and skated around. The 4 of us then headed down a trail through the woods to an area called the bridge. The bridge was just a large spot under a back road that had a bridge built over a creek. The creek dried out, leaving a huge concrete spot for tons of people to tag and spray paint. The first ominous sign was the owl. We all saw it perched up in a tree, staring into our souls. It gave a loud screech and swooped over our heads. We all laughed about it and kept walking. We got to the bridge and hung out for about 30 minutes. We shot metal BBs at the wall to make sparks and at some point lit up a small joint. I didn't smoke weed at the time and declined. That is how I know I can't chalk this up to being high. While we were there, I could swear I saw some kind of animal looking at me from the woods about 30 or 40 feet away. It was pitch black, but it's like I could see its figure, highlighted by the moonlight. I thought nothing of it. It was late and I was tired. We started to head back. It had just become 3 a.m., and someone made a joke about witching hour. God, I wish they would have shut up. On the way back, we noticed a trail that none of us had ever walked on before. We decided to walk down it. About halfway down the trail, we heard a noise. I stopped the group and pointed ahead. 3 or 4 coyotes crossed ahead of us. I told everyone they weren't dangerous, but we should wait for them to cross. Then one more came out of the woods from the left and stopped to look at us. I stood there frozen. I thought maybe it was frightened. It moved into the ditch on the right, only to move back out on the road and stand up on its hind legs. We took off running. I was much slower than the rest, but my brother grabbed my hand and dragged me along. I ran so hard my vision went dark, and I saw something. A vision and a name. Something in my mind that called itself Goddess. We made it to the parking lot and jumped in the car. As we peeled away, I saw something in the tree line, about 50 feet to the left of the trail entrance, on the opposite side of the trail from where the coyotes and what I hoped was a coyote were. A creature about 9 feet tall, with antlers and legs with knees that bent backwards. Its eyes reflected red as the headlights passed. I didn't tell anyone about it, but I did tell my brother about the goddess. I doubt that she was evil. I think she was protecting us from that thing in the forest. This story isn't even over. Next, we went to this place downtown called the Castle. We explored the castle just as the sky was turning from black to blue. It was about 5 a.m. We climbed down into the basement through the broken floor and climbed up into some rooms closed off from the rest of the building. All cool stuff, but nothing abnormal, except for the feeling of being watched. A feeling I expected while exploring a destroyed church in the dark. We checked out the train track nearby and found an empty homeless camp. I headed back to the car as they took pictures by the large cliff with the train tracks at the bottom. We parked the car by this side of the church in a lot that was once the chapel. The stone framing and parts of the rafters were still intact. That's when I saw them. I don't know how many, as I can't remember. I'll guess about 4 blue faces stared down at me from the rafters. They moved towards me in slowly formed bodies as they hovered 20 feet away and 10 feet in the air. 2.5 bodies formed before I screamed and ran. Tall, pale blue skin, and long fingers. Alien-like heads and black unnatural eyes. I ran back to the group. I thought it was weird. They weren't far away, but they never heard my screams. Come to think of it, I didn't hear them either. I just know I tried to and felt the pain in my throat. My brother thought I was so freaked out because our mother was going to be mad at us for staying out too late. I told him that it wasn't, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him what I saw. I have been haunted ever since. I see faces looking back at me from dark corners. Large creatures with undefined bodies and white faces like a mask stare at me from around corners and inside air vents. The more anxious or scared I get, the worse it gets. When I'm depressed, it gets even worse. The doctors say that I have depression and anxiety, which are accompanied by auditory and visual hallucinations, but everything began on that day. As for the goddess, I'll describe what she looked like. She was a tall woman. She has nude, golden skin, and black tattoos all over her body. She had dragonfly wings and bronze hair as well as yellow eyes. She told me her name many nights later. I heard it whisper in my ear. When I googled it, all I found was that it is a misspelling of a traditional Indian name that means a goddess from Hindu mythology, Pavarti. The name was Isha, but it was pronounced Iasha by the voice. I don't know what is going on. Someone tell me the things I've seen. The strange little green creature in the yard. Värmland, Western Sweden, summer 1987. In 1991, in a telephone interview with the magazine UFO Aktuelt, a woman told a story about a strange encounter that she and her partner had on a hot summer day in 1987. The woman wished to remain anonymous, as she thought the whole story was bizarre and that she did not want to appear as crazy, as she was concerned about her reputation in her circle of acquaintances. She also did not want the exact place where the sighting took place to be mentioned. This summer vacation, the woman and her boyfriend had borrowed a cabin in the westernmost part of the province of Värmland near the border with Norway. It was a Sunday morning, and it was 11 o'clock. The woman was standing outside brushing her teeth by a stone in the yard. She often stood here in the morning doing this. Suddenly she saw something in the grass in front of her. She bent forward to get a better look and then saw a small creature looking back at her. The woman could hardly believe her eyes. The creature was no larger than the clasped hand of an adult, about 10 centimeters tall, 4 inches. It just stood there and watched her without moving. The creature was light green with what looked like darker stripes on it. At the top of its head, it had 2 small brown eyes that glistened in the sun. It almost had the shape of a classic ghost, like when someone dresses up with a sheet. The lower part of the creature looked like it was floating out in the grass. She remembers no other details. The woman said she stood and watched the creature for about 5 minutes, without it moving. But she was absolutely certain that she had something alive in front of her. She didn't think it was an animal, because she couldn't think of anything like it. After a while, she called her boyfriend, who then came out. He, too, got to see the strange creature now. He could not understand what this was either. He thought they should touch it, but none of them dared. The woman thought she might put it in a glass jar, but something inside her told her not to do this. They even thought about poking the creature with a stick, but they didn't do this either. After 5 minutes, they had to leave the cabin to run some errands in a nearby village. When they returned later in the day at 5 p.m., the creature was gone. The woman told the reporter that she would never forgive herself for leaving the cabin without looking to see if the creature disappeared somewhere. It would be 2 years before the woman told anyone about the incident, and the person she told was her mother. The woman and the man lived in the cabin for several summers to come, and they often thought about the encounter, and they always kept an eye out to see if the little creature would return someday. The Luminous encounter. Luminous in southeast Finland, August 19, 1965. A family of 4, Matti, Maria, Tuvo, and Tapani, went to the forest near the village of Hermunen to pick blueberries. They scattered in 4 directions, always keeping eye contact with each other. About noon, 2 of them, Father Matti and his eldest son, Tuvo, had an experience they shared with the others only later. Already when they had arrived at the forest, Matti Kuningas had observed a large, round rock, or so it looked like, which he had never seen before, although this part of the forest was very familiar to him. The distance to the rock was about 30 meters, 90 feet. The rock was about 2 meters, 6 feet, high and 3 meters, 9 feet, in width, and on it there was some green moss and a very small, baby rowan tree on top. Suddenly a gust of wind rose, which astonished Tuvo Kuningas since the day was clear and calm. Both he and his father, Matti, observed now from their respective positions a little man, about 1 meter tall, who appeared near the rock. The man's skin was reddish like that of a carrot, and he wore green overalls or a jumpsuit. The head was large, and his shoulders were broad. Tuvo Kuningas observed a box in the man's chest, from which came some kind of light flash. Now the little man started to run away from the rock, and Matti Kuningas, who was closer, heard him make a mourning-like sound. Tuvo Kuningas heard a voice resembling human speech. Suddenly the little man turned and ran towards Matti Kuningas. He stopped at a distance of 15 meters, 45 feet, for a minute or so and looked at Matti. He seemed to have a human-like face, however, it appeared a little wrinkled and elderly. Then he turned and started to run away. About 50 meters, 150 feet, from Matti, he seemed to do an incredible somersault and disappear. Tuvo also saw the disappearance, but he also saw the man reappear, now closer to him. He was now somehow deterred by some unknown force and could not even look at the man properly. He could not move either. He also smelled a terrible odor in the air. After the man disappeared once again, he heard a noise from the direction of the rock, but nothing could be seen. And then the man was gone and didn't show up anymore. When the whole thing was over, Tuvo noticed to his astonishment that over half an hour had passed. They went deeper into the forest and continued with the blueberry picking for a while, and when they were done and were on their way to the car, they passed the place where they encountered the little man. Tuvo decided to have a closer look at the rock to see if there were any footprints. When he came near, he also noticed the moss and the little rowan tree and some silvery gray on its surface. When he tried to get closer to the rock and touch it with his berry basket, the same unknown force deterred him again and even turned him around and forced him to walk away. He thought of throwing a stick at it but could not do that either. Later, back in the car, he suddenly found himself unusually tired. He intended to tell the others about the experience, but soon it all vanished from his thoughts. Only gradually could he remember the incident, and 6 months passed before he told of the experience to his younger brother Tapani. Tuvo initially believed he was the only person who had seen the little man, but he later discovered that his father, Matti, had also seen him that day. This is a very strange humanoid case. Since there was no apparent UFO involved, should we categorize this as a cryptid or as an alien encounter? It leans towards the latter, since the small humanoid had some kind of technological box on his chest. And what about the large moss-covered rock that repelled Tuvo Kuningas? Could that have been a camouflaged UFO? No one knows, and we can only speculate. The other brother, Tapani Kuningas, thought a lot about this incident, and even though he didn't see the little orange man himself, the story affected him deeply. He developed a strong interest in the paranormal, which later led him to become one of Finland's leading ufologists. Camping. About 20 years ago my wife and I were camping in a UK forest one night when we noticed a green luminous light outside our tent. When we went outside to investigate, we saw a mist covering the ground that was about a foot high. Moments later we found ourselves naked on the grass about 15 yards from our tent and about 5 from each other. We felt paralyzed from the waist down, but we could just move our upper bodies enough to raise our heads above the mist and see what was going on. We also saw 4 male beings coming towards us from the woods. To me they had heads and faces like aliens, grays to be more precise, but to my wife they looked like handsome young men. They stopped and stood around her, touching her head as they did so. Her fear then seemed to disappear, and she told me not to worry, everything was going to be alright. We both sensed what they were going to do to her. However, it all seemed more like something from an erotic fantasy than an actual alien abduction. Years later we were told by an expert in this subject that an image screen had been used on my wife, making her see and experience what they wanted her to and preventing her from seeing and experiencing what she wanted to. We were also told that in all probability, instead of what seemed to happen, it was more likely that a clinically invasive procedure was done in order to harvest her eggs, or something like that. Fortunately, my wife had been sterilized the previous year, and maybe that's why they never came back. When we saw these beings disappear into the woods, we fled the area as quickly as we could. We noticed, as we were driving away, that it was beginning to get light, and in the UK in July that tends to be about 4:30 a.m. However, what happened started at around midnight and took, it seemed to us, about an hour. So what happened to the other 3.5 hours? My wife tried hypnotherapy to try and find out, but the therapist couldn't get past the image screen that had been used on her and, to some extent, on me. She could only recall what she thought had happened, and nothing of what perhaps did. An encounter on a snowy night. Lappeenranta, Vilmanstrand, Eastern Finland, March 1970. Pauli Pate Niiranen was born in 1938 and grew up in the town of Lappeenranta near the border with Russia. He started early with music and playing instruments, and it was the tones of jazz that captivated him the most. Pauli worked for many years as a sheet metal worker, but he always maintained music as a hobby and became a well-known saxophonist at jazz festivals in southern Finland throughout his life. Pauli Niiranen was also a devoted socialist and supporter of the Workers' Party and a friend of Russia. He was still playing jazz right up until his death in 2019. But one snowy night 49 years before his passing, he had a strange encounter that had nothing to do with either sheet metal or music. It was one of a series of strange UFO-related events in Finland during the early 70s. It was in March 1970, and Pauli Niiranen was on his way home in his car to Lappeenranta after a late jazz gig with his band. It was about 2 a.m. at night. The weather was really bad, and it was dark, and it was snowing heavily, with a strong wind causing snow drifts on the roads. It was hard to see, and Pauli was quite tired and wished he was home soon. As he drove down a street at the eastern end of Lappeenranta's airfield, he saw a small being standing at an intersection 200 meters, 220 yards, away. The humanoid was standing in the middle of the road, and it seemed like it was looking around as it turned its head in different directions. As Pauli drove slowly closer, he spotted 4 other similar beings, 3 on the north side of the intersection and 1 behind them on a road leading to the military barracks. The humanoids were short and only about 1 meter, 3 feet, in height. They had a big head, were thinly built, and had a glossy green color on their clothing. But it was the eyes that scared Pauli the most. The eyes were long, oval, and slightly slanted upwards, with a blue color that almost seemed to glow faintly in the dark. It looked like they were all staring at him intensely. After Pauli had observed the humanoids for about half a minute, he was seized with an uncontrollable panic, and he quickly turned his car around and drove home another way. The next day he read in the local paper that someone had reported a depressed, round melt mark on the road where he had had his sighting. Pauli did not report to the newspaper what he had seen. The only people he told were the other members of his band. But whether they believed him or not is unclear. It was not clear either if the aliens were fans of jazz. My mom believes she's been abducted by aliens for years. I am not discounting my mom because we believe in the supernatural and extraterrestrial beings. She estimates she's been getting abducted for at least 10 years. She doesn't have any full memories of her experiences. Her experience started in North Carolina and continued when we moved to Nevada, if that matters. I asked her the first memory she recalls. She said her first memory was in North Carolina. She was driving and saw 2 giant figures, about 12 feet and thin, in a residential neighborhood. When they made it across, they instantly became 2 giant deer. Too big to be real deer. She feels that they knew she saw them. When my mom goes through airport security, she always sets off their scans. Each time has been a different part of her body, even if she flies back-to-back days. Last night, she dreamt of / remembered an alien figure that was terrifying looking face to face with her. That's all she remembers. But she says this thing looks subconsciously familiar to her. Adding this extra story from my mom in case they tie in. When my mom was about 15 or 16 and lived in Nevada, she experienced an extraterrestrial experience. She was in her house one day when her mom wasn't home with her two siblings. She saw weird lights out of their kitchen window and joked to her siblings that it was aliens. She made sure to state that the lights were definitely not ordinary. The light moved closer and was about 2 houses down. My mom, with terrible survival instincts, decided to go check it out with their very protective collie. She saw what she can only describe as a flying saucer. She says her dog initially started out growling and barking at this UFO, they say. But then she says the dog started whimpering and ran off, leaving her, which was abnormal. She ran after that. Her dog went missing less than a week after. She saw a reporter on the news a year after asking about recounts of UFO sightings. She sent in her story. The reporter replied and said multiple other people sent in similar reports around the same time frame in the same area. We're just curious if anyone experienced the same thing or something similar. The peeping alien in the window. Harja, Western Sweden, August 25, 1958. Ivar Newman and his wife had rented a small cabin for the summer from a farmer, Oscar, who lived in a bigger house across the yard from the cabin. This was in the farmlands of Västergötland in Sweden. At around midnight on August 25, Ivar was sitting at the cabin's kitchen table reading a book. His wife had already gone to bed and was probably sleeping. When he put the novel away to light his pipe, he glanced out of the window beside him. Then he saw a figure moving near the outhouse. It was dark outside, and he couldn't see the figure clearly, so he thought it was the farmer Oscar. Ivar persisted in reading the book, but after a brief pause, he suddenly sensed a presence watching him. He turned around and looked at the window and stared straight into a face, not more than 50 centimeters, 20 inches, from him. Only the glass separated them. Ivar first thought it was a human, but then he quickly saw that the person standing outside was shorter than a human, with the height of a child of 11 or 12. The head was covered by a hood or helmet, and it was shining in a blue, cold light. The being wore a kind of jumpsuit or overall in the same shining blue color. Ivar was not sure about the skin color, but it was lighter than the clothes, maybe grayish. The eyes were definitely larger than a human's, and they were dark, almost completely black. His or her gaze had an unexplained effect, and it hypnotized me, Ivar said. For some reason Ivar was not scared of the mysterious being and hastily put on his shoes and jacket and rushed outside. He saw that the being was already running away, and it had jumped over a low fence and was now in a field behind the cabin about 100 meters, 300 feet, away from him. So Ivar ran out on the gravel road near the house to try to intercept the creature. After running for a while, he finds himself standing in a wheat field, just staring in awe. 25 meters, 75 feet, up ahead, he could see a strange craft. Ivar had never believed in UFO tales, but here was one now, just in front of him. The craft was quite big. About 12 meters, 36 feet, in diameter and in the shape of a disc. Now Ivar felt a weird smell and also felt tired in an unreal way. Currently he could also see that the small being had reached the craft and started to climb a long ladder. The being then disappeared up into the ship. Suddenly he hears a buzzing sound like an electric motor increasing in speed. The 3 telescopic legs under the craft retract into the hull, and the craft now starts to slowly rise into the air. Ivan tries to move but notices that he is completely paralyzed and can't move. The craft starts to accelerate and flies over some nearby birch trees that sway in the wind draft from it. In just a few seconds, the UFO disappears high up in the night sky. Once the craft vanished, Ivar regained mobility and sensed the ozone odor in the air. With 1,000 thoughts in his head, Ivar walked back towards the cabin. He woke up his wife to tell her about what had just happened, but she didn't believe him and said he probably only had a nightmare. The following morning, Ivar returns to the landing site in the wheat field, where the farmer Oscar has joined him. They search around and find 3 deep impressions in the soil with a depth of 30 centimeters, 12 inches, and a width of 20 centimeters, 8 inches. The vegetation was also pressed down in a circle that measured the outer dimensions of the craft, 12 meters, 36 feet. Ivar Newman reported the incident to investigators. This is just one of many old cases found in the archive for the unexplained. An alien encounter? I think I saw an alien once during the 88-89 school year, 3rd grade for me, actually in my school. At that time, I had never seen any depictions of gray aliens. I was at school for an after-school art class in the cafeteria at Julius Marx Elementary School and left the cafeteria to go to the bathroom. I turned a corner to go to the bathroom and felt like someone was watching me, so I turned and looked. Standing in the doorway of the class next door to mine, silhouetted against the light, was someone not human-shaped. They were no more than 4 tall, very skinny with a disproportionately large, egg-shaped head, and they had long, thin arms and legs for their size, like a child, but not proportioned like a human. I was a brave kid, especially when I was on my own and didn't have to look out for someone else. I didn't scare easily. But the whole thing just felt so wrong, so freaking alien. I was terrified. I dashed into the bathroom. I must have used the facilities because I was never one to wet myself, and I didn't need to go anymore. I don't remember anything that happened while I was in that bathroom. I don't know how I got back to the cafeteria. I can't remember, although I remember being very afraid and peeking out. Nothing was there. I ran back to the cafeteria and told everyone what I had just experienced. That's when I learned about aliens and what they were supposed to look like. One of the other kids drew a picture. I'm kind of freaked out that I can remember everything clearly except what happened in between running for the bathroom and running through the cafeteria door, other than a quick glance to see if it was there. I didn't get the impression that I was gone very long. Not even as long as I must have been gone, at least a full 10 minutes. On the few occasions I have shared this story over the years, I have only gotten 2 reactions: total disbelief in the assurance that I was just imagining something I'd seen on TV or read about, or total belief in the assurance that I was abducted that day and they erased my memory of it. All I can say is that I know for sure that I had never been exposed to any images of greys until that day after my experience. Until that moment, I thought of aliens as being fairly cartoonish in their appearance. And green. Remember that I was only about 8 at the time, and it was the 1980s, right before the image of the greys became commonplace in US culture. Also, although I can't remember a lot now, I'm fairly certain I could remember more until the past 10 years or so, because I had a good sense of how much time had passed, for one. That's enough for me to be fairly certain that I'm not missing time and never was in regard to this incident. Also, I've never had another encounter, have never had further signs of possible abduction, and have never seen a UFO. Anywho, that's my alien encounter story. I have many stories of other paranormal experiences. It's why I try to be skeptical. Maybe I'll share another some other time. Have a great day, everyone. Lucia and Haya's encounter with small aliens, including a bizarre projection/hologram. Mogi Guaçu, São Paulo, Brazil, October 18 to 19, 1965. Mrs. Lucia Anhaya, wife of Mr. Dario Anhaya, owner of Fazenda São Luís, reported an unusual UFO experience. The moon was already disappearing over the horizon when she saw an orange light approaching the farmhouse at the height of the treetops. She didn't hear any noise, but as the light approached, she noticed a pleasant aroma, which she attributed to the emanation of local flora. The luminous object then landed in the cattle pen, on the other side of the road, but it never touched the ground. It remained in the air, hovering half a meter above the ground, oscillating in a pendulum back and forth motion. Lucia, who was accompanied by a boy named Darren Ho, approached the gate of the cow pen, from where she could distinguish the conical configuration of the object, which was 3 to 4 meters in diameter at the base and 3 meters in height. From one side of the object, a tube measuring approximately 1.20 meters in length protruded. The device radiated luminous sparks around it. Next to the object was a small man, perhaps 1.20 meters tall. As Lucia watched from 40 meters away, she couldn't see his face, but she noticed that the little man was wearing a small gray veneer coat with little white spots the size of beans, with a stripe on the front. He didn't seem to have anything on his head, his hands were very small. The little man walked around a little around the cattle, which remained indifferent, and headed towards a mango tree 50 meters away. Suddenly, he disappeared from her sight, and the object also left. 5 minutes later the object returned, descending at the same point, and another small crew member emerged, this one wearing a white shirt, apparently starched, and chocolate-colored pants. This new entity she was able to see more closely, noticing his thin nose and delicate facial features. According to Lucia, he had a very cute face. The little man went back and forth 5 times to a nearby Jurubiba tree, taking an armful of branches to the object each time. To avoid detection on the nighttime road, Lucia and the little boy hid together. The object also did not want to show itself and hid behind some bushes, while the crew member mysteriously disappeared, only to reappear shortly afterwards. This went on for about 5 minutes, after which the object left the area. Then another truly exciting spectacle began. About 2 kilometers away, 2 identical luminous objects appeared in the sky, equidistant 2,000 meters apart. One of them, the one on the left, directed a beam of light at one of the wooden piles by the shed next to the house, and, for 2 or 3 minutes, an image was projected there, as if in a mirror or screen, of a little man looking fixedly at the house, sitting forward with his arms bent, as if he were sitting at the steering wheel of a vehicle. The little man had fair skin, a bald head, and was wearing a cream-colored coverall. According to Lucia, she didn't like this little man because his features reminded her of a person she didn't like. The boy approached the image and placed his hand about 20 centimeters from the woodpile, blocking the projection, and the corresponding shadow appeared in the image. When the projection stopped, the same device projected a horizontal light beam towards the other object. The beam, which had vertical lines as if it were a ladder lying down, grew in length until it reached the other object on the right. When it hit this object, there was an explosion and an extremely bright flash, and both the object and the beam of light disappeared. Strangely, at the same moment all the kerosene lamps in the house went out, and for a while, not even the battery-powered flashlights worked, and, what's even stranger, even the matches didn't light up. Later it was found that all the asbestos covers on the lamps had ruptured. The alien in my eyes. I was raised with a rather spiritual mom. Believes in spirits, demons, angels, the devil, God, etc. and aliens. Supposedly she was abducted many moons ago, and one of her friends corroborates the story because he was there, but I honestly don't know how to make heads or tails of it since I'm on the fence about aliens actually coming to our planet. Maybe a decade ago, one of my mom's friends told me I was probably abducted because I had 2 dreams within 2 weeks of one another that I was on a spaceship. It freaked me out more than anything, but I never really paid the idea much mind as I got older. But honestly, lately I've questioned that fact. For the past few years, on occasion when I close my eyes for an extended period of time, I'd see a faded out image of the stereotypical alien head, gray skin, almond face, large black eyes, no nose, and nearly no mouth. I would attempt to zoom into the image in my mind's eye, but I couldn't. I would either get scared or panicky, or the image simply wouldn't focus. Friday, however, was a totally different experience for me, and it shook me to my very core. Granted, I won't lie to you all, I still think this is more a sign of mental illness, maybe induced by stress, but you can make of it what you will. On Friday I went to take a nap. I started to sink into the couch as I began to see the same figure I had for quite some time now, but this time, it was less blurry. So I tried to focus. Immediately, a sharp ringing, tinnitus, came down on me. I got scared, but I tried focusing in again slowly before the hazy state of my soon-to-be nap settled in. Again, tinnitus. Loud. Finally I snapped, I closed my eyes, focused in immediately, and saw the face crystal clear, like it was right before me. I could see the texture of the skin, the glossiness of the eyes, and the porous nature of the nose. Then my body cramped, my whole entire being felt wrung out like a towel. It hurt so much I seized up into the fetal position for a second. As frightening as the event was, I simply took myself to my bedroom and continued my nap there. The weirdest part of the tale is at some point in the day, I remember a figure being in the basement, across from the stairs leading down, in front of the garage door. It was the same alien, surprisingly short. I had always heard they were tall, but this had to be 5 feet 7 inches 8, but this time it wasn't just its head I saw, but everything. I simply stood there, in a neutral yet embraced position, like it would be ready to sweep me off my feet at any moment. I don't remember when that happened. I don't know if I dreamt that after the tinnitus incident. I don't know if I daydreamed it. But all of a sudden the memory was in my mind, and now I can no longer see the alien's face when I close my eyes. I literally cannot even imagine it anymore, though the feeling is still there. I just remember how I felt about it, which is why I can describe it so well. So that's that. There's my encounter? Or mind duck? One or the other. The eerie, luminous Barbapapa-looking creatures. Vänersborg, Western Sweden, September 21, 1991. Around the world, people have seen strange creatures that glow or shine in different colors. This story was reported by a man and woman who saw something strange one early morning. Stefan and Anne-Louise Hallgren are like any normal couple. They met through work in 1989. Stefan is a mechanic at a local bus company, and Anne-Louise is a bus driver for the same company. They started dating, got married, and had a daughter named Alexandra. Now, they live in a house in a quiet area. But they have also both experienced unexplainable events several times during their lives, which they cannot forget. On a clear night in the fall of 1987, Stefan and a friend were at the water tower in Nyhammer to look at the stars. The time was somewhere between 9 and 10 p.m. when they suddenly saw a red line at the horizon. The light came closer, and they saw it change into 3 red glowing orbs that flew straight towards the surprised young men. Stefan had a film camera with him and took many pictures of the light phenomenon. He took the last pictures with a flash. Then the orbs of light made a 90-degree turn and moved away at high speed until they disappeared into the sky. After they met, Stefan and Anne-Louise sat down to talk. during which Stefan shared his observation from above and described other events, including a light phenomenon he had frequently seen in the sky that resembled the shape of an H. Then Anne-Louise froze. She too had seen this phenomenon. One autumn evening in 1985, she was alone in her car and driving on Road 45. She had been working at the Korsberga nursing home and was now on her way home. There was not much traffic, and the road and the rural surroundings were dark, lit only by the car's headlights.
Suddenly, A.L. saw a phenomenon of light coming toward her over the treetops.
It looked like several red bicycle reflectors coming towards her. Together, the red lights formed the shape of a large H in the night sky. The phenomenon lasted only a short while and then turned to the side and disappeared from view beyond the trees.
The incident shook A.L. so much that she had to halt the car to regain her composure.
But the episode was nothing compared to what she and Stefan would experience a few years later. It was an early Saturday morning, and Anne-Louise had set the clock for 3:30 p.m., when she would get up and be at work at the bus company in Vannersborg at 5 p.m. She got up quietly so as not to wake the rest of the family and did not turn on the light in the house. Carefully she descended the stairs to the bottom floor. When she came down the hall, she saw a strange light outside. She went forward and looked out the window towards the garden. Then she saw something she didn't think was true. On the other side of the street in the neighbor's yard, 3 luminous figures were moving. They looked quite small, and they had neither legs nor arms. The only thing they had was a body almost similar to the children's book character Barbapapa. The creatures were shimmering in green and glowed with almost the same color found on luminescent watches and other things. Anne-Louise stood and just glared at them. She needed to go to the bathroom, but she couldn't move. She stood as if bewitched and watched the creatures that floated across the neighbor's lawn. Finally, she came out of the trance and whispered at her husband. Stefan wondered what she wanted and said that he couldn't come down because he was too tired.
A.L. now shouted angrily, "You must come.
I see something. And don't turn on the lights." Finally, Stefan came down and now saw why Anne-Louise was so upset. "I saw 3 creatures just like Barbapapa in shape. The color was a sharp greenish with clear outlines. They may have been about 90 to 100 centimeters high, 3 to 3.3 feet, and they hovered a few decimeters, 3.9 inches, above the ground. The creature's appearance was luminous. It was visible when they passed near one of the tree trunks inside the yard. And the strange creatures seemed to be looking for something, for they were twisting around as if they were searching the ground." Stefan told. He continued, "How long we stood there watching them is hard to say. It might have been 15 minutes, maybe less. You perceive time so strangely in such an extraordinary situation. I had my camera on the hat rack and took it. But unfortunately, I had the wrong lens. It couldn't be used, and I had the others up in the attic." Anne-Louise was now very scared and thought the whole thing was very terrifying.
Stefan tried to open the front door, but A.L. stopped him.
She instead suggested that they should turn on the lights in the house and the exterior lighting.
A.L. quickly turned on and off the light in the hallway, and then the 3 creatures on the other side of the street immediately disappeared.
Both were now really scared, and they sat down at the kitchen table to calm down.
Finally, A.L. left for work on trembling legs.
When Anne-Louise came home from work later in the day, she and Stefan went over to the neighbors and asked if they had seen anything out of the ordinary that night. They had gone to bed around 0:30 p.m. and hadn't noticed anything strange at all. Anne-Louise felt unwell for a long time after this incident, and she often had difficulty sleeping and thought a lot about the eerie Barbapapa-looking creatures she saw that autumn night. It also turned out later that more inexplicable observations were made in nearby towns such as Uddevalla and Trollhättan on the same night. And someone had also seen similar creatures in the same place a few years earlier. Anne-Louise and Stefan learned some time later that at the place where they saw the creatures there was once a well, where it was said that a child drowned a long time ago. It was not human. 7 shocking humanoid encounters. There's no experience quite like a face-to-face encounter with an extraterrestrial humanoid. All over the world, people of all different ages and backgrounds are describing the same kind of thing, seeing beings that are not human. People have reported seeing greys, reptilian creatures, human-like figures, and a variety of short and tall humanoids. Many of these cases are supported by outside witnesses and other forms of evidence, such as landing traces, physiological effects, electromagnetic disturbances, animal reactions, and more. This video presents 7 cases from various locations on the planet, each offering a journey deep into the heart of the UFO phenomenon, each exploring the nature of extraterrestrial contact. 1. The Loveland Humanoids. Around 3:30 a.m., restaurant worker Robert Honeycutt was driving along the Madeira-Loveland Pike just south of Loveland, Ohio, when he saw three very unusual looking figures who looked like they were praying or kneeling alongside the road. Curious and puzzled, he stopped his car and took a closer look. To his shock, he realized they were not human. They were very short, with bald heads, frog-like gray faces, misshapen bodies, and were wearing gray jumpsuits. One held a rod that was emitting blue sparks. He got out of his car to get a closer look, and all three humanoids turned to look at him and stepped closer. The next thing Robert knew, he was back in his car, racing towards the Loveland police station to report his encounter. It turned out that other people in the area were also seeing UFOs. And soon there would be several more reports of strange humanoids. Something horrible was out there. On the evening of November 13, 1967, Philip Freeman and his friend Angela Carter were driving to their homes in Woking, Surrey, England. They stopped the car on an isolated country road to dry the windshield, and both immediately smelled a sickening odor. Returning to the car, Philip saw a short humanoid with no visible facial features apparently looking into their car. As they raced away in fear, he saw that it was about 4 feet tall with a dark, squat body. 1 year later, near the same area, another couple had a similar encounter when they saw a short, shadowy black form approaching their car. Going to the area later, they also smelled a horrible stench. Both before and after these encounters, many people were reporting different types of UFOs, and in 1973, a young boy had a dramatic encounter with humanoids and a landed craft outside his home. I was glued to the ground. On the evening of July 22, 1968, nurse Adela Casalvieri was puzzled by the unusual silence of the patients at the Pereira Psychiatric Hospital in Mendoza, Argentina, where she worked. Usually there were fights and people walking around, but not this night. Things then became even more unusual when she heard a deafening buzzing noise coming from the hospital courtyard. Running outside to investigate, she found herself paralyzed by an intense beam of red light coming from some sort of craft that had landed in the courtyard. After a few moments, the beam retracted, and Adela could now see a large, silver, metallic, saucer-shaped craft with a dome and colored lights rising up from the ground. Through the portholes on the dome, she was amazed to see several humanoid figures moving around. The craft darted off. She screamed for help and collapsed. Other nurses came running, and Adela was taken to the doctors to be examined. She suffered from burns on her hands and face, and her hat was also burned. She also tested positive for exposure to radiation. An examination of the landing site also showed radiation and an unusual mark on the ground. The plants nearby had been burned. Later it was learned that other people in the area saw what was apparently the same UFO. In that year, Argentina was experiencing a massive UFO wave, with several other cases of sightings, landings, and humanoids. It scared the hell out of me. July 19, 1972, was a normal evening like any other when a young man from Pioneer, Michigan, was shooting hoops in his family barn. Then movement from the corner of his eye caught his attention. Turning to look, he saw a glowing ball of energy swirling in mid-space. He stared at it, trying to figure out what he was looking at. Suddenly it expanded in size and became what he now recognizes as a gray alien. At the time, he'd never heard of such a thing. It was less than 4 feet tall, with a large bald head, dark eyes, tiny facial features, and 3 fingers on each hand. The witness felt pressure in his head as if the ET was trying to communicate telepathically with him. Overcome with fear, he ran into his home and told his mom he had just seen a ghost. Later that evening, they took a drive and had a close encounter with a UFO hovering over the road ahead of them. A few years later, the witness had another close-up sighting. But it would take many years for him to understand what had happened to him. This creature was not human. On the evening of November 8, 1986, Sarah, age 20, stood on the back patio of her parents' home in rural Clovis, California, and stared at the strange blue lights at the edge of their 200-acre property. There was nothing out there, and wondering what the lights could be, she vowed to check the next morning. But when morning came, she forgot all about it. But that night she saw the lights again and promised herself she would definitely investigate the next day. On the morning of November 10, 1986, she brought her golden retriever dog and a rifle she used for rabbit hunting and took the 10-minute-long hike up to the spot where she saw the lights. Arriving there, she suddenly felt an overwhelming inexplicable fear sweep over her. She realized her loyal dog was missing. And turning around, she saw what she first thought was a little boy with a big head. Looking closer, she saw it was actually a bald, big-headed, alien-looking figure with large dark eyes and a small nose and mouth, wearing a skin-tight black jumpsuit. It raised its hand and waved. Sarah took off home and saw that her dog was there, and she was now missing almost 2 hours of time. Strangely, she did not remember the encounter until a year later when her bedroom was filled with blue light and a gray alien appeared at the foot of her bed before disappearing. The memory of the incident a year earlier flooded back, and she also began to remember other weird events from her childhood. 6. An alien beside my bed. Natalie is both anonymous with her name and specific location but reports that on August 25, 2022, she woke up in the bedroom of her North Carolina home, turned over, and saw a shadowy humanoid figure with a large head standing next to her bed, reaching out and touching her knee. Staring at it, she realized it was an alien. It sent her a telepathic message to have no fear and promptly disappeared. Natalie was stunned and became even more shocked when she realized over the next few days that her chronic insomnia, which she had suffered from her whole life, was now gone. She had been cured. Then later, she began to wake up in the morning with her clothes on backward and weird marks on her body and a possible implant in her mouth. She ultimately concluded that she was being taken by the aliens. This hypothesis seemed confirmed when she later had another encounter with a tall, skinny humanoid in her bedroom. These cases are just a tiny portion of the massive database of similar encounters coming from different people all over the world. If it were just these cases, or 10 or 20, it would be simple to dismiss them. But there are thousands and thousands of other accounts. Almost all of them contain striking similarities that argue strongly for their veracity. Any explanations such as hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, or mental illness fail to illustrate how cases widely separated in time and place can share so many common details. The only alternative explanation is that extraterrestrials are indeed visiting us. The hovering humanoids. Smedjebacken, middle of Sweden, August 1968. The province of Dalarna, known as Sweden's heartland, features a beautiful undulating landscape filled with vast forests and many large lakes. It is also the source of the country's iconic images of midsummer celebrations. But Dalarna is also known for its many mines. Mining in the region for silver, copper, and other metals began already in the Middle Ages and continues even today. Unfortunately, many mines remain closed today, and this story unfolds in the vicinity of one such abandoned facility. It was in the late summer of 1968, an 11-year-old Benny Magnusson was playing with his friends in an abandoned mining area in the woods at Smedjebacken. There was a large group of 15 boys aged 11 to 15 who were here this late afternoon. They were staying at an empty earthen cellar. An old mining area might not be the safest place, but the cave was a favorite spot, where they had played war and other games several times before, and they had never felt unsafe or experienced anything unusual before. But this time it would be different. Towards the evening it was time for Benny and the others to go home, and on the way they passed some old mine holes. The boys were walking on a trail out in a meadow opposite them when they suddenly saw some white-clad beings coming towards them in the direction of the holes and then standing in front of them some distance away. The group of boys also stopped, and they started to become disoriented and anxious. Although the beings resembled humans somewhat, Benny and his friends soon realized that they were not human. Among other things, Benny and his friends observed their movement, which involved hovering slightly above the ground. The boys were paralyzed with shock, and when they started walking again after a short while, the beings hovered after them parallel to the trail. Benny remembered clearly many years later what the beings looked like. They were large and about 2.40 meters tall, 7.8 feet, and they were dressed in white coveralls with hoods over their heads. The head was round, slightly larger than a human's, and the skin was grayish-white. They had large black eyes, a long, narrow, and pointed nose, and a mouth as small as a line, with no visible lips. In one of their hands, each being carried what looked like a white document briefcase. Benny and his nervous friends walked parallel to the hovering beings for a short while, but then one of the boys panicked and started running, and then everyone in the group ran. One of the boys dropped his glasses in the grass and didn't dare stop to look for them. Instead, he ran on. Even though Benny and one of his friends were also very scared, they stopped and picked up the glasses. The tall and white-clad beings were then only 4 to 5 meters, 13 to 16 feet, from Benny. Looking up, he made eye contact with one of them, and it was a gaze he would never forget. He felt as if the being saw right through him and could read his thoughts and knew everything about him. Benny ran for his life and caught up with the other boys. When they got out onto the larger forest road, they took their parked bikes and mopeds and drove away as fast as they could. They had no idea if the beings were still after them, and none of them wanted to stop and have a look. After this incident, none of the boys ever went back up to the abandoned mining area. They talked about it, but none of them dared. And in time, only 3 of the boys remembered exactly what happened that night. Everyone else had seemed to repress it or pretend not to remember. In addition to Benny Magnusson, it was also Kjell Osling and Staffan Hellander who remembered what happened at the mining area. All 3 have given statements that are similar to each other. Benny Magnusson would have many more UFO experiences over the years. He believes that this first encounter with the beings opened up his mind, and he became more receptive to the phenomenon. He began to see UFOs everywhere. Sometimes he was alone, sometimes together with his friend Kjell Osling, and other times in the company of other people. Later, Benny also began to study the UFO phenomenon, and he became a ufologist. He is convinced that one day they will appear to us en masse, and when that day comes, the world will be different. Then all the knowledge we have now about the origin of man and life in the universe will be obsolete, he believes. Humanoid close encounter. Ambushed on a desolate road. Vaggerö, Sweden, October 29, 1965. I am usually not very fond of contactee cases, because I find them rather far-fetched and a bit egocentric. The idea that a random person here on Earth has been contacted by an alien race and got a mission to save humanity or the planet and other strange things we have read about in those cases, I find a little hard to swallow sometimes. But this story is quite interesting, though, and it involves the famous trans-medium couple Sture and Turid Johansson from Stockholm. During the 1970s, they became quite famous internationally in parapsychological circles and hosted Hollywood celebrities like Shirley MacLaine and Dennis Weaver at their home in Sweden. Sture met Norwegian Turid from Kirkenes in the late 50s. Turid moved to Stockholm in Sweden, and they married in 1959. Both were very interested in meditation and spirituality, and both Sture and Turid considered themselves to have clairvoyant abilities. During 1964, the couple also became interested in ufology and joined the Ufological Society in Stockholm. A short time after a meeting at the society, Turid spoke on the phone with a friend. Suddenly they both heard a male voice say on the phone that Turid and Sture were going to a place called Vaggerö on Thursday evening, a small community located in the countryside south of Stockholm. Then the voice disappeared as quickly as it had come. Sture and Turid went out to the place on Thursday as the voice said, and then they often went there in the evenings to sit in the car and meditate. Occasionally when they were sitting there, they could perceive blue-purple waves or radiations flowing through the car. The trips to the place in the Vaggerö countryside continued, but after a while mysterious things started to happen every time Turid and Sture went there. During the winter of 1964, so many mishaps happened that they began to wonder if someone was trying to stop them from going there. The most common was that the car broke down in strange ways. So once they even went to the meditation place on Vaggerö on foot. It was many kilometers, they had to walk, many miles. This evening it also snowed. As they walked and plodded along the snow-covered forest roads, suddenly an intense blue-white light came behind them, almost like a welding flame, and they jumped into the ditch, and the light passed quickly past them on the road above and then shot vertically into the sky like a rocket. If Sture and Turid had not jumped out of the way, the beam of light would have run over them. On the evening of October 29, 1965, scores of UFO sightings were reported in Sweden. Thousands of people across the country had seen a bright shining object pass across the sky between the hours of 6 o'clock and 7 p.m. Many years later, the renowned Swedish UFO researcher Claes Svahn investigated these sightings and concluded that they were due to the American spy satellite 1965-79A that crashed and produced this spectacular light phenomenon high up in the sky. But the satellite theory does not explain everything that happened this autumn evening. Over the Stockholm area and south down towards Vaggerö, many had observed a long, dark, cigar-shaped object with many windows. People likened it to a railway carriage with lighted windows, gliding silently over the landscape at low altitude. And in Enköping, young people had seen some small, strange creatures running across the road at around 11 p.m. The radio station in Enköping also stopped working this evening. Reports of strange occurrences also reached Denmark. In Sønderborg at 8:15 p.m., the air raid siren started to wail at the same time as the electricity went down to low power and disappeared almost completely around the city. And the Danish Air Force received UFO reports throughout the evening. Whether it was due to the crashing satellite or something else was unclear. During the day on October 29, Turid Johansson had received a telepathic message that she and Sture would go to the meditation place on Vaggerö at 10:30 that evening. The voice also told them to be careful because there is a power struggle going on here on Earth. When they arrived at the scene, they were too early, and it was only 9:30 p.m. They could not understand why it was like that. When they had stopped the car in the usual place, they suddenly saw some shapes in the twilight light down by the meadow. And they came quickly closer until they were right beside the car. Sture estimated that there were 5 to 6 creatures, and some of them were only less than a meter, 3 feet, away from him. And they were about 1.2 to 1.5 meters, 4 to 5 feet, tall, dark green with very large heads and large eyes without pupils, and glowing red like phosphorus. They had no ears, nor did he see any feet, but instead they sort of floated across the ground in straight lines, no soft curves. Both Sture and Turid got the feeling that these creatures were evil. While the creatures were around the car, the transistor radio that was in the back seat went down and just crackled all the time. Stura and Turid were now terrified, and they wished another car would pass by on the narrow gravel road, but none came. As quickly as they appeared, the creatures now disappeared back down towards the meadow. And then all hell broke loose. A crash was heard, and it was as if a flying saucer landed on the roof of the car, which began to shake. The radio screeched and jumped around in the back seat, and Stura and Turid tried to hide under the dashboard. They thought the car would break off in the middle. Then everything suddenly stopped, and it was calm again. Both of them were completely shocked and did not dare to do anything. After a while, they had the courage to drive away. Stura and Turid estimated the entire sequence of events to last 5 minutes. Despite this, they did not get home until 4 o'clock in the morning. Where had all the hours gone? They didn't know that. And later they were offered to find out more about the lost time under hypnosis but declined because they were afraid of what might be discovered then. The day after the incident, Stura and Turid went back to the scene during the day, but they never found any traces of the night's assault. In the evenings after dark, they never again dared to go back to the meditation place on Vagaro. They both believed that evil had now taken over, which transformed the pleasant location they had come to associate with happiness and tranquility into something terrible. Over the years, many strange and supernatural events would befall Turid, ranging from strange people she met who knew a lot of things about her that no one should know to people she saw in dreams and then saw in reality, people she met who she could communicate with telepathically, others telling things that would happen in the future and then it occurring, strange voices on the phone, strange footsteps in her residence, and other things. But nothing of a UFO nature happened to Turid until January 22, 1974. Turid and her sister were on their way home in the car from a lecture. It was 8:30 p.m., and they were on Lidingö, just outside Stockholm. Driving past a golf course in a secluded area, they suddenly saw a light out on one of the courses. Since it was January, no one was out golfing at this time of year, especially not so late at night in the dark. Soon after they saw the light again and the outlines of some strange people between the trees, and these people were very long and narrow. Turid's sister wanted to stay and watch, but Turid felt uneasy and thought something was not right, so they continued to go. When they had traveled a couple of 100 meters, 200 to 250 yards, they saw a shining object pass by the road at low altitude. When Turid came home, she told Stura about their experience, and he then revealed that he too had seen a glowing orb outside his window that evening. Therefore, they returned to the golf course on Lidingö that same evening. But they saw no sign of the creatures or the shining object. When they got back home and went to sleep, they heard footsteps and what sounded like a buzzing bumblebee outside the house. Turid's sister also experienced similar phenomena outside her home. In the middle of the night, Turid and Stura woke up to footsteps outside and several knocks on the front door, but they could see through a window that no one was there. What Turid and Stura Johansson experienced was very strange, and if they were telling the truth, it will be even stranger. Because after all, there were some things in this fascinating story that sounded rather absurd and far-fetched. But still there were some similarities with other UFO stories. Small floating creatures with large eyes have been observed in other reports, such as the Hopkinsville Goblins case in the USA in 1955. And in France in 1976, a woman driving from Madden to Latong du Banal late at night reported seeing a lot of small green creatures with big glowing red eyes in a field next to the road. Are the same creatures appearing in these three stories? Maybe, maybe not? Perhaps it is just coincidence? We also see some similarities with other contact case stories. Either they actually experienced this, or there are similarities due to simply reading other stories and imitating them. But we will never know the truth, because neither Turid nor Stura Johansson is with us anymore. Turid passed away already in 2010 and Stura several years later in 2021. Strange creatures and humanoid beings. The Lantern Man in the Archipelago. Karlshamn, southern Sweden, around 1965 to 1969? The Lantern Man is a phenomenon that has been told about for hundreds of years, not only in the Nordic countries but also in other parts of Europe and North America. During the late 1960s, several reports came in about a mysterious being with a lantern that was seen in the archipelago in southeastern Sweden and that terrified the population of the islands. A fisherman from the area named Carl Berntsen told the following story to a newspaper. It was a dark August evening around 11 o'clock, and he had been out fishing with two other local men all afternoon and evening, and they were now on their way home by boat through the archipelago. They were approaching Tarno, Turnbird Island, from the south side, and the moon was shining brightly, so they could see the outlines of the beach and the forest with the old trees that go all the way down to the water's edge. Inside Sørviken, Sour Bay, which has been known since old times as an eerie and spooky place, the water surface was mirror-like, and everything seemed calm. But then on the shore at the end of the small bay, the fisherman on the boat could see a large dark figure walking around with a crooked back. The large man, or creature, or whatever it was, held aloft an old-fashioned lantern in his left hand. The lantern shone with a strong reddish-yellow glow, and the light flickered faintly in the weak night breeze. The boat with the 3 men was only 30 meters, 100 feet, from the shore, and they were sure that the being with the lantern must have seen them too. But if so, it seemed as if it did not care about the fishermen and just continued to walk slowly along the shore. Then it turned up towards the forest, and moments later the being and the light disappeared among the trees. Carl Berntsen asked himself several times afterwards why they did not take the boat into the bay and pursue the man. But if he was honest, none of the fishermen in the boat dared, even though they were all well-trained men in their prime. It felt as if the creature radiated evil and coldness, and all the men in the boat felt the shivers and feelings of unease. Carl Berntsen also wanted to emphasize that all 3 men on the boat were sober, since they did not use any alcohol. They had not been drunk and were imagining things. There were more people who had seen supernatural things on Tarno. A completely normal young man in his 20s said that he had met the Lantern Man one evening down by the beach a few years earlier. He had received such a strong shock from seeing the mysterious creature that he had fallen over and fainted. The man said that it was not the shock of the sight, but that there was an unexplainable eerie impulse emanating from the creature, or rather the red light from the lantern itself. Surviken, where the Lantern Man has often been sighted, is a dark and gloomy beach area and has dense vegetation of bushes, smaller trees such as pines and birches, and tall grass. It is semi-dark there even in the middle of the day. Even the cows and sheep that roam freely on the island avoid this beach area, despite the tall, juicy grass here. For years, many have claimed to see the Lantern Man on the island from boats and land. The first sightings began after the end of World War II, and it was initially believed that they were Soviet spies or shady people like smugglers. But most people now dismiss these theories, as people claim to have seen a creature that is not of this world. There is a road on the way to my camp deep in the Adirondack Mountains that has a dangerous dip and curve. When I was a child riding with my grandmother, she tended to accelerate somewhat abruptly, then braked unexpectedly at the most inopportune location, causing the vehicle to slide into the gravel off the roadway. She didn't hit anything, but man, I remembered it. As a teenage driver, I always slowed down significantly when approaching that spot, recalling the terrifying experience. Once when I was riding at night with my sister, I told her firmly to slow down. As she approached the curve, and her headlights suddenly cut out. Both of them. She came to a dead stop as we couldn't see anything. We both screamed as she was stopping because it felt like a car accident with no impact. That kind of real fear. It is scary dark in the woods at night with no moon. She turned her lights off and then back on again, and they worked fine. We wigged out a little bit, but what can you do? We continued onward, running on adrenaline and nerves. A year or so later I was telling my friend the story on our way up, and about 20 yards past the spot, my ducking headlights turned off. He got pretty mad at me and told me to stop ducking with him, but both my hands were firmly on the steering wheel, and he knew it. I turned them off and on again, and they came back on. Rinse and repeat, and it becomes a creepy joke I don't even bother telling people about. About once every 25 trips to camp, this will happen late at night. I now take that curve at 15 to 20 miles per hour and piss off every redneck in town who has the misfortune of being stuck behind me on the way back into the woods from a town bar. I am now 36 years old, and this issue occurs less frequently with my car, which has lights that remain on continuously. However, I still find it baffling. I can't explain it, and it is so crazy. I don't even bother sharing the story anymore. I assume it is like a spirit telling me heads up and that I need to look out when I'm at that spot. Related to the alien theme, the property behind said scary curve is owned by cousins. And the one behind that is owned by my cousin's cousins. That is how the Adirondacks works. We all know each other's business. I know the woods well, and there are no houses, no businesses, and no logging going on. Where the properties meet far into the woods, there is an open field. You can see it from a few miles away when coming down a big hill. Mountain foothills are crazy. Every now and then, you can see for miles, and then you're buried in the dark woods again. When heading home from camp with my sister on a late Sunday night, I saw a light in said field. A lot of light. There is no electricity there. No way to get it there. This is the late 90s or early 2000s. No cell phones in that area yet. There still isn't any service. Whatever was down there made so much light that the sky above it looked like a small city had been erected. A glow hung in the clouds above the field. We were like, WTF? There is literally nothing where that light is coming from. We thought maybe fire? So we slowed down as the road approached the woods next to where the light was expected to be. We got out and crept a little deeper. There was a goddamn circus tent. Like ducking killer clowns from outer space. It was a huge, revival-style white canvas deal with lights coming only from inside. No light outside at all, but it was bright. We raced out of there fast but couldn't explain why it scared us so much. It just felt wrong. The next day we called our cousins up to ask what the hell they were doing in the woods at 2 a.m. with a white tent, and they had no explanation. They laughed at the scared city folk and told us we were nuts. Maybe they are secretly cooking meth. Or maybe the aliens meet 50 yards from where my headlights always turn off on their own. But either way I am staying in my car no matter what on that stretch of road. I want to share an experience that occurred a few years ago. This story takes place in July of 2010 in O'Bannon Woods State Park, Corydon, Indiana. There were about 10 of us that went camping for my friend's bachelor party. Here it goes. It was a loosely designated campground and hiking trail. The park/campground was located at the end of a long, semi-residential road that had rural houses along it, with maybe about 15-20 plus acres separating each house. From the parking lot, there was a long hiking/walking path that went on much further than the area we decided to camp in. The campsite was about a 3 to 5 minutes walk to the cars. Our group was the only crowd in sight, probably because it was supposed to rain that weekend, and it did, thankfully just a sprinkle. As we all sat around the campfire, the night went on. People began retreating to their tents around 2 a.m. Most everyone was dozing off. Soon after it was my brother in the chair around the campfire and then the groom. The groom climbed in the tent near the circle of chairs surrounding the campfire. About 15 minutes after, I noticed my little brother fully asleep in his chair. In the terrible setup of the camp, my brother and I didn't load our sleeping bags into the tent. I walked him back to my car to pass out. It's about 3 a.m. Unprepared and not thinking ahead, we walked back to the car in the dark, with no flashlight. The moon was occasionally present when the small storm clouds left it uncovered, so the path was slightly illuminated. We got to the car, and my brother climbed in. I began to walk back to camp and had no feeling of fear. The path had tall wild grass/brush on the right side of the path. It was taller than me, maybe 6.5 feet tall. On the left were large native trees, and further to the left was the creek. A loud crunching of foliage interrupted my daydream as I made my way back. It immediately sent shivers up my spine and rumbled my stomach. This is when it dawned on me that I had no flashlight. The crunching sound was loud, as if someone was evenly laying down a large sheet of wood over the tall grass. If I had to estimate, the piece of wood would have to be at least 4 feet by 6 feet in order to make the crunching I heard. In addition, the sound was in one wave or burst, as if all of the tall grass was pressed down evenly from above. The reason I say this is because it wasn't like a large animal lying down. It was a crunch plus a swoosh sound directly following the crunch. It was almost like thick branches being snapped at once. At first I told myself it was an animal lying down, but as the sound continued 3 times more on my walk back, it became obvious it wasn't an animal lying down, as the crunches became louder and closer as I continued down the path. After the second crunch sound I got really scared. By the third crunch I had the feeling something was creating the sounds for me, as they seemed to follow along my right side as I walked back to the campfire. Once back, I sat down in the same chair around the fire. I think I lasted there for maybe 2 minutes alone. During that time, I forced myself to stay up and overcome the fear I just experienced. Normally when drinking my subconscious is slightly overactive, so I wanted to prove to myself that the sounds had been nothing. Moments later I had the feeling of someone watching me, which is nothing new when being scared and alone. The odd thing was soon after, like 15 seconds, I felt like there was someone new watching me, from another angle. It was very odd to have the feeling of someone behind you twice. I began to panic a bit, trying not to whip my head around in fearful gestures. And then it happened again. I felt like the number of people watching me increased, and now, I felt like there were 3 or 4 people watching me, all just outside of the visible range of light given off by the small campfire. As soon as I felt like there was a group in the dark, I decided to retreat. I climbed into the tent as calmly as I could. I was in the same tent that housed the groom. I lay down next to him with my head near the zip door of the tent. Due to the lack of sleeping bags, I was on a thin piece of foam that is used to soften the ground under a sleeping bag. I was scared and wanted to sleep, so I began to focus on my breathing and trying to sleep, while attempting to discredit my current feelings of fear. As soon as I began to doze off, I was awakened by the soft sound of rain on the tent. Like the slow crinkling sound of raindrops hitting the tent, I opened my eyes and noticed that the top of the tent didn't have the rain guard on it, the extra piece of material that attaches over a tent to keep the rain out, and as the crinkling sound of the tent continued, I awaited a raindrop to enter the screen mesh opening at the top of the tent and for a raindrop to strike me. However, the tent was slightly covered by the canopy of a tree, so I lay there waiting for a drop to sneak through the net opening of the tent above me and get me wet. And out of nowhere, the tent began to move, very, very slowly. I lay there in disbelief, terrified, in shock. I couldn't speak or move. As I felt rocks slide slowly underneath me, it was as if people were sliding the tent away from the campfire. After maybe 4 to 5 seconds of the slow movement, the left side of the tent was lifted slightly higher, because of a tree that was parallel to the tent's movement path, and the groom rolled into me, as he lay on my left-hand side, and the tent continued to move. After the groom bumped me, I began to nudge him, but he was passed out. I looked to the left corner of the tent and saw what could have been a hand grasping the cloth of the tent. I sat up slightly. It was happening to 3 of the tent's corners, and that's what made the crinkling of the tent fabric sound that resembled rain seconds ago. As soon as I saw the hand, I reached for my phone and opened the flip phone directly next to the hand, exposing the appendage to the phone's light. As soon as I did that, the tent stopped. I did not see any movement. I waited to hear fleeting footsteps to determine if another person from our group was messing with me. I was terrified at this point. I was praying to hear footsteps, but I heard none, not a sound, not a pine needle snap, nothing. Now in the tent, the groom is lying directly next to me, and I begin to nudge him until he wakes up. He woke up and apologized for rolling into me, as he awoke nearly snuggling my left side. I didn't mean to scare him because I thought there were people standing outside the tent. I convinced him to get up and have another drink with me. We climbed out of the tent, and there was nothing there. As we sat down in the chairs, I asked if he noticed the tent being moved. He didn't, but acknowledged that he rolled into me. I told him what happened, and he was very reluctant to believe me. So I said, well, the tent was moved, right? And we looked over at the tent, and there in the ground were 2 grooves made by the tent poles as if they had been dragged about 3+ feet. At that moment, he looked at me with some disbelief but mostly fear. At that moment, I became very nervous for my brother, so we rushed back to the car in the dark, where I explained why he had rolled so close to me and informed him about the crunching sounds. So, finally, we get back to the car, and everything is fine. My brothers passed out and were too tired to listen to our wild story at 3 or 4 a.m. The groom and I head back to the campsite, kind of spooked but relieved, and then bam, the crunching sound again. Now, I immediately acknowledged the sound from earlier, but I waited for the groom to say something. And on the second crunch he did. He looked at me with his jaw dropped in fear, as I smiled and whispered, "See." Well, the crunching continued and followed us on the right of the path, continuously getting louder. After the 5th or 6th one, the crunching almost sounded like it echoed together in a rhythmic sound. Soon, it seemed to be on the very edge of the tall grass and the trail, and I swear, it was the craziest emotion I have ever felt. I thought I was on the verge of exposure. I was 2% excited and 98% fear-struck. My eyes fixed on a point of tall grass where I imagined a being to step out onto the path. My crackled voice let out the words, "We are not ready," and my friend, the groom, also said something like, "Please, not now." We looked at each other, slightly shocked at what we each had said, and right then, the fear stopped, and mainly, the sound stopped. On a dime. We went back to the campfire nearly in disbelief, and we both passed out confused and speechless. The next day, we looked for any evidence of the crunching sound, but the only thing we saw was the remnants of the tent markings on the ground. It began to rain around 10 a.m., and we packed up pretty quickly. The groom and I were very quiet the next day. We had intended to go kayaking. However, both of us preferred to return home and forego the remainder of the day. So we convinced the group the rain would ruin the kayaking excursion, and we all went home. To this day, the groom and I believe we made slight contact that night. And that's it, people. If anyone has any questions or related stories, I would love to hear them. In particular, if anyone can identify the crunching sounds that I heard, that would be amazing. I have looked online for anything that slightly relates to that but have been unsuccessful. I've always said paranormal activity and abduction events can be / probably are related. My uncle claims to be an abductee, and he came to live with me for about 2 years. During those 2 years my house became so paranormally active I wouldn't even go in the house unless somebody else was there. So, yeah. Location, Curitiba, Brazil. Date, January 1978, time, night. Claudia accompanied her young son, Cristóvão, to the elevator so he could go down to play. In the elevator they met a strange man that smiled at Cristóvão. Later, worried about her son not returning home early, she went to ask the doorman about her son, and this one told her that he had not seen him get out of the elevator. They searched in vain for young Christoval the rest of the night. Around the same time, strange events were occurring in the apartment. Objects were moving on their own volition, and a sound similar to a beep was constantly heard. The next morning around 8 a.m., an employee at a local power plant discovered Christoval sleeping on the grounds of the plant. According to Claudia, Christoval was emitting a very strong odor and told her an incredible story about boarding a rocket that took him to a yellow moon. From there, he was taken to an even larger moon. There he encountered a man and a woman that appeared to lack mouths. The humanoids apparently inserted some items in Christoval's head and gave him rice and fish to eat and a reddish gaseous drink. In that place Christoval saw other children. He was later placed on a small bed, covered with a blanket, and allowed to sleep. He told his mother that they would one day return for him. She also discovered several marks on her son's skin that had not been there previously. He kept pointing at the region of the sky where he said the yellow moon had appeared. The strange paranormal occurrences around the house continued for a while and then abruptly ceased. Close encounters with humanoids, most shocking cases. One of the most incredible experiences a person can have is seeing a UFO. But a very close encounter with a humanoid extraterrestrial is undeniably much more incredible and often shocking. A close-up face-to-face meeting with an actual ET allows almost no chance of misperception. It is the kind of encounter that cannot be denied or explained away, the kind of experience that can alter the path of a person's entire life. This video presents 10 shocking accounts of very close encounters with UFO occupants. The cases span from 1923 to 2012, come from a wide variety of locations on Earth, and involve many different types of humanoids. Multiple eyewitness testimonies and undeniable evidence, including radar returns, photographs, landing traces, and more, also support these cases. 1. UFO lands for repairs. One summer morning in June 1923, 10-year-old Norman Wilson Massey went outside his home in Mount Erie, Illinois, to let the horses out to feed in the pastures. To his absolute astonishment, he saw a flying saucer land on the ground with 5 little blonde men inside it. They were each about 4 feet tall. They were hurrying back and forth, evidently repairing their craft. After 5 minutes of observation, the craft rose up and away. Norman told his family, who advised him to keep the encounter a secret, which Norman did for most of his life. 2. Many surprises await terrestrials. One bright summer morning in 1945, 9-year-old Ishebatar Ayab ventured to the shores of Taganrog Bay in the Sea of Azov, Russia, near his home to catch some fish for dinner. He was about to return home when a silver plate-shaped craft dove from the sky and plunged into the water just offshore. Most of the craft was still above water as a humanoid dressed in a silver metallic jumpsuit exited and walked up to the witness. The witness asked where the little man came from, and he told him that he came from another planet. He then invited the boy to come on board, and he would take him to his planet. The witness declined the offer, fearing he might not return. 3. Humanoids visit a Navy ship. In 1952, the USS Franklin Delano Roosevelt aircraft carrier was visited by a metallic disc, which was the first of what would eventually become at least 10 separate UFO encounters. In 1956, there were 2 additional encounters, which were not only detected by radar but were also photographed. Then, in 1958, Navy officer Chester Gruzinski rushed up onto the deck just in time to see a cigar-shaped craft approach and hover by the ship. When another craft appeared. To his amazement, he and dozens of other officers observed 2 alien figures looking down at them through the portholes of the strange craft. The event was covered up and deleted from the ship's logs. Chester Gruzinski learned that the other events were also covered up and began an investigation that would change his life forever. 4. The Doctor and the Alien. On August 26, 1966, Dr. Juan José Rivera decided to go fossil hunting and take some pictures of the Straits of Gibraltar and drove his motorbike to a rural area near Punta Carnero, Spain. Without warning, a strange silence settled over the area. Moments later, a strange monkey-like figure wearing a jumpsuit levitated across the road ahead of him. The doctor got off his motorbike and chased the figure down a hill to a weird craft landed a short distance away. He had his camera ready and quickly snapped a picture. Then he became overwhelmed by fear and fled the area. It would be years before he talked about the encounter. 5. The humanoids outside the window. At 10 p.m. on January 29, 1967, Enid Campbell was in her home in Knox City, Missouri, when she saw what she thought was the full moon outside her window. But looking closer, she was shocked to see that it was actually a white sphere-shaped craft of some kind. It quickly approached her home and began to hover in her backyard. Looking inside the strange craft, Enid noticed 2 little humanoids dressed in shiny silvery wetsuits. She called out for her 2 children. They ran up just in time to see the craft as it moved away. Afterward, They looked in the backyard and discovered burned vegetation where the craft had hovered. 6. A UFO and humanoids land by a train. On April 20, 1967, a group of railway employees riding past the Casalegno station in Argentina were puzzled to see a strange craft with multicolored lights landed alongside the railroad tracks. Moving hastily around it were several 3-foot-tall humanoids in brown jumpsuits. The railway engineer slowed down the train, and he and his fellow workers watched in amazement as the diminutive humanoids bustled around the craft. They later discovered that the workers on an earlier train had also seen the same craft. 7. We did not look back. At 3 a.m. on September 30, 1968, 2 young men ran out of gas and were walking along a rural road outside of Roadside, France. Without warning, a brilliant red glowing object raced across the sky ahead of them. Coming around a bend in the road, they saw that the light was apparently a craft that had now landed on the ground. 2 short humanoid figures were levitating a few feet above the ground around it, shining powerful lights on the ground. Suddenly one of the humanoids floated right up to the witnesses. The witnesses, fearing discovery, fled in a panic. 8. Rock collecting aliens. Around dusk one evening in 1976, 9-year-old Hercilia da Costa was walking to her home in rural San Gonçalo do Amarante, Brazil, after attending catechism class. As she walked through a forested area, she was suddenly confronted by a shocking sight: a landed UFO. 7 human-looking figures in dark jumpsuits were milling around it. One appeared to be gathering pebbles and depositing them in a sack. Then one of the figures spoke to Hercilia in a foreign language. Afraid, Hercilia ran to get some adults. 10 minutes later they returned to the location, but the craft and humanoids were gone. However, they did find footprints and strange landing traces. 9. The floating humanoid. It was 1:30 a.m. on December 30, 1979, as Sebastiano Panigeri woke up to find the bedroom of his home in Sicily, Italy, filling with strange light. At the same time, his dog in the attic began barking and growling. Looking out the window, Sebastiano was awestruck to see a short humanoid dressed in a skin-tight white jumpsuit. It levitated a few feet above the ground just outside his window. It floated around his yard for 5 minutes before zooming away at high speed over a wall. 10. 2 aliens are above 2nd Street. On the night of May 25, 2012, 6 people were driving home in 2 cars heading west on Highway 7 in Clinton, Missouri. As they approached the stoplight at 2nd Street, they were shocked to see a large craft with glowing portholes hovering overhead. Even more amazing, 2 skinny humanoids were looking out the window down at them. For one of the witnesses, the event was the first of many sightings. There are so many cases of humanoid encounters. These cases are just the tip of the iceberg. These kinds of events are much more common than most people know. And they have so much to tell us about life beyond our own little planet. My mother and I saw a UFO once. In broad daylight. I'll never forget it. To be clear, I'm a skeptic. I don't doubt people's experiences, but for me, an unexplained occurrence is not proof of any particular theory. The universe is massive. There's no reason to think intelligent life doesn't exist somewhere besides our solar system. But I don't believe aliens, if they exist, have visited Earth. Still, unexplained phenomena can occur. And even in the absence of an explanation, I can confirm I experienced it. Anywho, it was July 4th. It would have been 1998, I think. You don't need the full backstory, but the context explains why we didn't hang around longer to watch what happened with the unexplained object. I have a brother who is 10 years younger than me. He was a baby at the time, toddling around in one of those rolling walkers. I was taking some food out of the oven around lunchtime, and even though I thought he was far enough away, he managed to roll over and stick his hand on the edge of the oven door just as I began to close it. He burned his fingers. I felt awful. My baby brother started screaming in pain from this burn, and I started panicking because I'd allowed him to get too close to the hot stove when I should have been watching him better. My father was a firefighter and paramedic, working a shift at the fire station. As we often did with our childhood injuries, we decided to drive to the fire station so my dad could look at the burn. If we needed to go to the hospital, he would tell us. It ended up being a minor burn, but with a kid that young in so much pain, we wanted to be sure. So my mother was driving our minivan to the fire station. I was in the back seat, next to my screaming brother, holding a cool compress on the burn and trying to keep him calm. We arrived at a familiar intersection on the town's outskirts, where the fire station stood. 2 roads intersected, and, at the time, there was an old, abandoned farmhouse sitting in a field near this intersection. There is now new construction all over that area, but at the time it was pretty sparse. My mother stopped at the crossroads and said, "What in the world is that?" I was still next to my brother's car seat, trying to calm his crying and holding the cool compress on his burn, but I looked up to see what my mom was pointing at. Above the farmhouse, there was something. I still have a hard time describing it. It was metallic and vaguely pyramid-shaped. It was hovering in place above the old farmhouse but spinning slowly in a circle. Judging its size in relation to the house, it was probably the size of a compact car. We sat there for a minute or two, both of us staring at it. It gradually changed in shape. Not exactly transforming, but kind of morphing. I don't really have the words for it. Almost like when you take a Rubik's Cube and turn it. But it wasn't that organized, it stayed in place but sort of folded into different shapes. While it was changing shapes, it also started changing colors. The whole thing didn't change colors, it was kind of like, I don't know. Like it had lights inside it that changed colors. The entire object did not glow. If you held a flashlight under a thin blanket, you might see one area of the blanket lit up from within, but not the whole thing. It was like that, if that makes any sense at all. Dark blue, then soft pink, then a greenish kind of color. I remember being totally stunned. Even as a child, I was somewhat skeptical, often asking questions such as, is that some kind of balloon or something? No. It's shiny like metal. Is it a plane or something similar? I was legit trying to process what this thing was by running through a list of explanations. Blimp? Elaborate kite? Weird airplane. I even thought of fireworks since it was the 4th of July. None of it made sense. There was no sound that we could hear. Our car windows were rolled down. The house was about 30 feet back from the road, so we were fairly close to this thing. We could not see any lines or strings, and if it was suspended from something, we don't know what, because it was in the middle of a field, hovering over a house in broad daylight. There was nothing above it but clouds and blue sky. So we sat there for a minute or two, staring at this thing. It floated in place and pulsated and morphed and flashed. No noise, no motion in any direction, just a weird object in midair. This whole time, my brother was still screaming his little baby lungs out, in pain from the burn. As much as I wanted to stay there and watch, my mom said we needed to get him to the fire station to get the burn looked at. Slowly, we turned at the intersection and drove away. I stared at it until it was out of sight. Since we turned the corner, I got to see it from another angle. It looked the same from the front and back. Clearly a three-dimensional object. We got the burn looked at, cleaned, and bandaged by the medics on staff. When we drove back home, we passed the same spot. There was no sign of anything at the house. As if it had never been there. I remember it vividly, and I still ask my mom now and then if she remembers. She describes it the same way I do. Of course my brother was too young for him to remember. By the way, that's how I remember it happened on July 4th. We had to miss our local fireworks display because my brother was still fussy and uncomfortable because of the burn. To this day, I have no idea what I saw. I live elsewhere now, but for years after that, every time I passed that farmhouse, I'd search the sky in hopes of seeing it again. No such luck. There you have it. My UFO experience. The people with square hats, the boneless young woman, and other strange encounters. Svanholm, Eastern Sweden, winter 1935. Carl Axel Jonsson is a well-known name in Sweden's UFO circles, as he is one of the founders of UFO Sweden. He was born in 1928 and grew up in the countryside about 40 kilometers, 25 miles, from the small town of Motala. Kai became interested in UFOs at a young age since he personally had an unexplainable experience as a child. As a young man, he moved to Motala and held various jobs. It was during his time as a technician at the Air Force Base in Linköping in the early 60s that he came into contact with other UFO enthusiasts. A few years later, Kai started its association, which became UFO Motala in 1968. And it was this association that later published the well-known magazine UFO Information, from which I have found a lot of material. In 1970, Carl Axel Jonsson began the work of starting up a nationwide UFO organization that would later become UFO Sweden. Over the years, Kai would have many UFO experiences, and he also experimented with other paranormal phenomena, such as astral travel, mind reading, and seeing into the future. It was one morning at 8 o'clock in the countryside around Svanholm in the winter of 1935, and the 7-year-old boy Carl Axel Jonsson was on his way to school. There was a lot of snow on the roads and bad plowing, and it was difficult to get there even on foot. On this day, Kai was going to pick up his cousin Britta, with whom they lived next door. They used to go to school together sometimes. After plodding along the road, Kai saw his uncle walking further away. He had a milk jug on his back that he was going to give to the boy's father before he went to the dairy. Just before they met, Kai saw something out in the snow-covered meadow on his right about 50 to 100 meters, 55 to 100 yards, away from him, which looked like a dark upside-down bowl or dome. Some sources say the distance was longer. He thought it appeared to be a craft of some kind, which he estimated to be 5 meters, 15 feet, in diameter. 4 to 5 strange people plodded around in the snow around the object. Some sources even say there were as many as 6 to 8 beings. They appeared to be slightly shorter than full-grown men, and Kai believed they were perhaps 1.6 to 1.7 meters, 5.3 to 5.5 feet, tall. They were dressed in what looked like black, clumsy, old-fashioned rubber diving suits, and on their heads were black square hats similar in shape to those worn by beekeepers. When the humanoids moved and walked, the boy thought they had an almost ape-like behavior. When Carl Axel Jonsson's uncle came up to him, Kai asked, "What is that?" The uncle shoved the hat behind his neck with his hand and said, "Who the hell knows?" They looked at the craft and the beings for barely a minute, then the uncle had to go in order to leave the milk for the boy's father before he left for the dairy. Now Carl Axel started to be late for school, and he therefore thought of crossing the field to his cousin's house. However, as soon as he stepped onto the field, a dense fog enveloped him. It was like walking in cotton candy. He didn't know where he was, and he walked in the direction of what he thought was his cousin's house. After much effort, including jumping over a ditch, the fog cleared, and he arrived at a place he recognized, a road by an old burial mound that he knew led to the school. When he arrived at the schoolyard, he saw that the children were already sitting down and eating their packed lunch. It was now past 11 a.m. Almost 3 hours had thus disappeared. Where had he been? A female teacher came up and wondered where he had been. Kai said he had wandered around in the fog and couldn't find his way out. The teacher became frustrated and told him to stop lying because there had been no fog that morning. Carl Axel Jonsson's experience on that winter morning was one of several encounters he had with alleged visitors from space. Another time was 1953, and Kai was then living in the city of Avesta and working in a hotel as a janitor. The pay wasn't the best, so Kai also worked extra as a hypnotist, mind reader, and magician at various fairs, markets, and entertainment venues in the region. In 1953, or was it 1954? Kai can't remember for sure. He and a friend were at a dance place outside a small community called Krilbo. The night didn't go well for Kai. Even though he was quite tall and handsome, no girls wanted to dance with him, since he was notorious in the area and considered weird due to his side job in the supernatural and paranormal. So when the evening was over, he could not find his friend, and therefore he wandered alone along a small road towards Krilbo. In front of him he saw a woman and a man of his own age standing and arguing with each other. They were both short and tanned with a Southern European/Italian appearance, and both were well dressed. The guy had a darker suit with a tie, and the girl had a short dark green dress patterned with light green 4-leaf clovers, which was a bit against the fashion of that time with dresses that went down past the knees. The dress almost looked like it was painted on the body. She was very cute, almost like a doll, and she was probably one of the most beautiful girls he had ever seen. Kai, who was tall, walked up to the shorter man and told him to get out of here or he would be in trouble and that he was now going to take care of the girl. The man walked away, and Carl Axel put his arm around the girl. He remembered that she was very soft. It felt strange because there was, no resistance. They went and sat down on a low roof of an earthen cellar that was next to the road. He put his arm around her waist, and there was no resistance either. Kai was now both a little embarrassed and also a little worried. Something wasn't right. He put his arm around her shoulder again and found that he could push his hand all the way to her throat. It was as if the girl was made of foam and had no bones in her body, like she was a rubber doll. However, Carl Axel was still interested in her and asked if they could meet again. The girl replied that they could only meet this one time. Kai asked where she lived, and she pointed down towards the Dale River. Kai said that there was only the railway and trees and bushes and then the river. But the girl insisted that it was down there, where she lived. According to Carl Axel, the girl spoke in a strange manner, using an odd sentence structure and older vocabulary that no young person in the 1950s would typically use. After that they parted and went their separate ways, and he never saw the girl again. He began to think about whether it was perhaps a woman from Mars or some other planet that he had met. What happened to Kai, others have also experienced. There are more stories of eerie encounters with people who didn't seem fully human and had a doll-like or mannequin-like appearance and who seemed to have completely lacked bones in their bodies or had limbs that could bend at strange angles. Over the years, Carl Axel Jonsson would experience more strange things. In an interview in the newspaper Trelleborgs Allehanda on August 29, 1974, he told about an incident that happened when he and his wife were out driving a few years earlier. It was winter, and they were driving on a road surrounded by high snowbanks on both sides. Suddenly, They saw a car coming towards them from far away, but then the car took off from the road and began to fly, only to disappear straight up into the sky. Another time, they both saw a flying saucer land on a road, and then almost immediately it took off again. In the Olandsbladet newspaper on June 1, 1976, Kai told about an occasion when he was alone in his car and went to his work in Malmslat, and then saw a small disc-shaped craft the size of a soccer ball flying parallel to his car for a short while. He was sure it was an alien reconnaissance probe of some kind, and they were watching him. After retiring, Carl Axel Jonsson began to devote more time to his hobby of restoring old radios during his last years. And it was in his workshop that he had a strange encounter once, when Kai was trying to fix a radio from the 1930s. He had the front door open because it was summer and hot outside, and he was sitting with his back to it. Suddenly there was a knock. Surprised, he turned around and said, "Come in." An older man, 60 to 65 years old, entered. He was dressed in a gray-brown suit with small black patterns on it, and he also wore a shirt and tie. The strange thing was that there was gravel out in the yard, so Kai should have heard the man walking from afar. Nor had he heard any cars parked outside. The man could, of course, have parked the car up by the country road and walked down to Carl Axel's house. But then he would have heard someone walking in the gravel anyway. Kai asked the man if he could help him with anything. The man said he was looking for old telephones. Kai replied that he only dealt with old radios, but he knew where he might find old phones. He explained to the man that he should go to an antique shop in nearby Scanning, and he explained how to get there. "What is Scanning?" The man wondered. "It's a small village." Kai replied, and he then began to wonder what kind of strange man he was actually talking to. The man hurriedly said, "Thank you and goodbye," and disappeared out the door. 2 seconds later, Carl Axel followed out into the yard, but then the man was gone without a trace. He could not have disappeared in such a short time, either by car or on foot. It was impossible and incomprehensible. Kai found it difficult to concentrate on working with the radio for the rest of the afternoon. He thought of the mysterious man who just went up in smoke and had an uneasy feeling. This weird feeling lingered for several days, and he never forgot this encounter. Carl Axel Jonsson became a central figure in UFO Sweden for several years. He understood what others went through when they shared their experiences with the supernatural. In 1979, Kai left UFO Sweden after a dispute with the management, but he got to see the organization he started turn 50 years old in March 2020. A few months later, Carl Axel Jonsson passed away at the age of 91 years old. The night the aliens showed themselves. For years I've been a firm believer that aliens are out there, but all of these abductions and alien sightings are probably BS because, as many physicists and debunkers have said, if aliens were real, they probably wouldn't be these big-headed, squishy, huge-eyed creatures. They'd have to be able to travel amazing lengths at astronomical speeds, and it's just not realistic for them to go themselves and be able to survive when they could, let's say, have mini droids do the work for them. Though it has always been a thought of mine that maybe a civilization out there could find a way, wormholes, TARDIS, lol, who knows. I never thought I'd get to experience anything that would make me question if they are already watching us. I've seen strange lights before but always had a somewhat possible logical explanation, even if it did creep me out. But what happened to me this night was beyond too real, scary, and nightmare-inducing. To this day I don't know how to make sense of it. It was about 3 in the morning. Recently some strange things had been going on in my house. My brother had claimed to sometimes see shadows, and every once in a while I would get the feeling that someone was watching me. But at the end of the day we all just chalked it up to being scared of the dark and being kids. My parents had some strange things happen too, but they didn't want to scare us, and my father is a very strict skeptic, so he probably wouldn't have said anything anyways because he would try to rationalize even if it couldn't be rationalized. A few weeks into these small strange happenings, we visited some family in a different state, and my aunt told us about this health food store with a woman who was very in touch with the spirit. My mom brought us over to speak to her and maybe see if she could help calm our nerves. Unfortunately it didn't. After my brothers left the room, she asked to speak to us alone. She hadn't brought up anything scary, and neither had my brothers, just that they were afraid of the dark sometimes, and she said some sweet things that made them leave feeling happy. I am skeptical of these people, but after my brothers left the room, she got serious and told us specific things that had happened to the two of us, things we hadn't even spoken to each other about. She knew things about what was going on in the house, or so she claimed, and told us that we needed to do a couple of cleansings and make sure we protect ourselves but that our family is powerful and she has faith in us. I was a little freaked out. My mom tried to play it off, as she was just trying to get us to buy sage and other things, but she did. When we arrived home, my mom didn't do any of the things this woman said. I think after talking to my father, she kind of pushed it away and convinced herself that this woman just got into her head so she could make a few bucks off of some mumbo jumbo. It was about 3 in the morning. Everyone was upstairs sleeping except for me. I was downstairs in the living room talking on the phone when I wasn't supposed to be and watching a movie. All of a sudden my phone started to crackle, and I got that strange feeling I was being watched. From the living room you can see partially into the kitchen. I looked down at my phone, and it had shut down. When I looked back up, in the corner of my eye inside of the kitchen, I saw this very tall gray alien staring right at me. I screamed slightly, and as quickly as I had seen it, it was gone. I cowered on the couch because it had seemed so real. I got my phone to turn back on and called my friend, and he calmed me down. I was shook up, but he convinced me I had been watching too many scary movies and that everything was fine. He'd stay on the phone with me until I got upstairs and until I fell asleep. After a while of heart-throbbing paranoid fear, I convinced myself he was right and went upstairs. The next day I'm sitting in the car with my mom and dad. I'm wondering in my head if I should tell her about what happened, but I didn't want to seem like a baby or scare her because my mom is a bit of a scaredy cat. I look at my mom, and she has this strange look on her face. I ask her what's up, but she says nothing. I put my headphones in and I'm just about to press play when my mom tells my dad quickly in Spanish, "Last night at about 3 a.m. I think I saw a creature leaning over the bed. Don't get crazy, I don't want to scare Christina." I understood Spanish pretty well, but since it wasn't my first language, they'd try to speak really fast when they didn't want me understanding something. Plus, she thought I had been playing music already, but I hadn't and understood it all. I looked at my mom, and she kind of glanced over and said, "Baby, what's wrong? Are you sick?" I had lost some color in my skin. I looked at my dad and back at her and said, "Mom, last night at around 3 a.m., I saw a tall gray creature, alien type thing, standing in the kitchen staring at me." Both she and my father fell silent. Then she said, "It was gray? With big eyes? Tall? Really skinny?" I added, "Long fingers, weirdly skinny." We both continued to sit quietly in the car. My mom then broke the silence. "I'm not sure if that was an alien or some kind of spirit or demon trying to mess with our heads and play on our fears, but whatever it was, tonight we are going to cleanse the house the brujeria way, the way my family has told me to, but I've never needed to before. I need to accept that our family has connections to something real and sometimes scary. I need to make sure you know how to protect yourself." After that my mother and I cleansed the house. My father even helped with the cleansing. I learned that night that both sides of my family have had strange encounters going back to my great-great-grandparents, if not farther. My parents had never seen anything unusual, but they enjoyed the stories while growing up and believed they were just that, stories. That night something triggered in them that made them start to think differently. They were still skeptical, but with the constant strange sightings from anyone who came to the house, they felt that maybe there are some things out there that we don't know all about and that we can't always see. Maybe they weren't as open to it as their children are, and if that's the case, they would protect us as best as they could. If you let these perversions grow, they surround your life in a darkness. They had heard the stories of family members experiencing this issue, but now it felt different. They were not only becoming aware of it themselves, but it was also increasingly affecting their children. And they were not going to let that continue. I saw a man made of light on a night when my entire family thought someone had broken into the house. When I was a teenager, I went on a vacation with my extended family. This was around 2008, back in Punjab, Pakistan, where I'm originally from. We're a very tight-knit group, so I had my father, mother, sibling, uncles, aunts, cousins, some of their families, etc. It was a big group of people, and we were staying at my late grandfather's giant wooden house in our remote village. The place is surrounded by trees and rivers, and everything else, markets, shops, other people, is pretty far away. Anyway, all of us somehow managed to fit in this house, so there were around 20 plus people sleeping in 7 to 8 rooms. I was sleeping with my father in a long horizontal room at the front of the house. The room had 2 beds, one on each side, and a central walkway that penetrated the room vertically in the middle. This walkway was basically the entrance to the main part of the house. So the actual sighting was pretty short. We were all sleeping, but I suddenly woke up, maybe a few hours after midnight. I'm usually a heavy sleeper, so there must have been noise from within the house, but I don't remember hearing anything. I was still half asleep, but I could sense there was some type of unrest in the house. I looked to my right towards the walkway and saw a man. I don't know if it was a man or not, but this man-shaped thing was standing there, maybe slightly moving. He looked to be around average height and build, but he was entirely made of light. I still remember that he was just light, but man-shaped and moving. The next part is a bit embarrassing for me, but I actually just went back to sleep immediately afterwards. I did not get up to check, I did not feel like I had to, I just saw him and fell asleep. The next morning, I start my day without even thinking about what happened yesterday. I just assumed that I had a dream about this man made of light. Imagine my shock when I learned that literally everyone in the house was convinced that someone had broken in last night. I asked for details, and I learned that every adult in the house woke up for some reason, maybe noise, maybe something else, this part is still unclear to us, and they convened and came to a conclusion that someone had broken in. Obviously they were scared because burglaries are common in that area. However, it was a big group, and they apparently decided to search the entire house. And by search, I mean really search every nook and corner, under the beds, old cupboards, storage, upstairs, downstairs, everything. They apparently did this for an hour or more, and my father said that they did not leave one single place unturned. My father grew up in this house, so he knows it very well, along with my uncles. The result of the search expedition, they did not find anything. They were thoroughly convinced that there was something in the house, but nobody could find anything. Of course, I immediately told them my story, and they all believed it. Everything was too weird to be a big coincidence. Anyway, we all moved on and went on with our lives after the vacation ended. The most surprising thing to me, even to this day, is that I was not scared of what I saw. I distinctly remember how I felt when I saw this light man, and fear was not what I was feeling. In fact, I wasn't feeling anything. I felt like he was where he needed to be. My true childhood paranormal experience, a UFO turns into a military jet? Ever since I was a very young lad, I always pondered the existence of extraterrestrials. Perhaps like all of us from a certain age. For me, growing up in the northeast of England, no older than 10, the existence of aliens, or UFOs for that matter, was as mysterious and uncertain as the existence of God. Even the existence of other creatures, such as vampires, werewolves, Bigfoot, or the Loch Ness Monster, Nessie, as we Brits like to call her, seemed equally likely or unlikely. As that young, blonde-haired boy with pointy ears, the only aliens I knew of were from the movies I watched. Whether it was War of the Worlds or Independence Day, these movies could only imagine the possibility of alien life and the consequences of that without providing the real thing. But by the year 2012 and barely into secondary school, it would seem I may finally have my answer, whether I really accepted it or not. I have already recently shared both of my childhood UFO experiences before. As a writer by trade, I decided to use my craft to revisit these two mysteries in the hope of uncovering as much detail as possible so I can definitively determine whether what I saw as a boy was real or not. It will be up to the listener to determine whether the events I witnessed were real, if my childhood imagination overpowered me, or if I was simply exaggerating. Although it may not seem significant without any evidence, what I am about to share did indeed happen as I remember it, to the best of my recollection. By the year 2012, I had been growing up in the East Riding of Yorkshire for the past 7 years, in the average-sized but oddly named port town of Goole. This town was of no particular interest, except perhaps for its two landmarks, two rather tall water towers, humorously named the Salt and Pepper Pots. Settled beside a tributary river, Goole was sparsely surrounded by patches of farmland and large crop fields, perhaps the perfect setting for a UFO story, like the crop circle stories I knew of in the United States. But my first UFO sighting would be in town, just 100 meters from my bedroom window. Unfortunately, I don't remember the precise year this first event took place, although I do know it happened in either 2011 or 2012. Therefore, I was either in my final year of primary school or my nerve-wracking first year of secondary. Regardless, I would have been around 11 years old. As a child and even through my teens, I was always a bad sleeper, either getting no sleep at all or waking up in the very early hours of the morning. It was on one of these early mornings that I woke up to my silent, pitch-black bedroom, with everyone else in my house fast asleep. Not having an alarm clock or phone to tell the time, I wondered what time of night it was, perhaps to know how much more sleep I could get. As I said, this was all a regular occurrence for me, as was peeking my head through the curtain next to my bedside to see if the sky was still dark. By looking out from my bedroom window, I would have seen my 20-meter-long garden, which I regularly played football on, as well as the neighboring house on the other side of my back garden fence. However, what I saw just beyond the roof of that neighboring house was something I had never seen before. What I saw, flying, gliding, or simply just moving, 100 meters or less away from my bedroom window, was what I can only describe as a flying saucer-shaped-like object. In the past, I described this object as the most stereotypical flying saucer shape you could ever see or imagine. The night was too dark to see its color, but I remember it making a distinctive humming noise as it moved over the town beneath it. I recognized this object as saucer-shaped because, as it moved and hummed, a single row of small bright lights circled around it. At that age, if I imagined a flying saucer, I would have pictured a particularly large craft, but this object seemed no larger than a car or a small van. The speed at which this thing moved was not particularly fast or slow, but fast enough so that what I was seeing was gone in the next 5 to 10 seconds. Not knowing if what I had just seen was in fact real or just a dream, I pinched and slapped myself, hard enough to wake up almost anyone, but I was awake, and as you can imagine, I was in disbelief. If any one thing, paranormal or otherwise, that you didn't already know or believe in just appeared to you, confirming absolute proof, whether it was God or Jesus Christ, a heaven or a hell, even ghosts and yes, aliens. I think anyone would have had the very same first reaction. This can't be real, I must be dreaming, do I need to question the meaning and my own understanding of life? That was the reaction I remember having, rational in the face of the unbelievable. If you were to ask me what I did next, having witnessed such an extraordinary and incomprehensible sight, you'd be surprised to learn that what I did was simply lie back down on my pillow and eventually fall back to sleep. You'd probably be surprised, but that's what I did. The very next day, I found my mom putting laundry away in her and my dad's bedroom, with the event of last night still fresh in my mind. Feeling comfortable enough to tell my mom almost anything, even which girls at school I fancied, I told her exactly what I saw the night before. Like any parent would, having been told a fictitious sounding story by your young child, my mom showed no indication of surprise or even shock, instead responding in the lines of "oh wow" or "oh really?" as she carried on folding the laundry on the bed. I asked her if she believed me, and she said she did, but even before I confessed to her what I saw, I knew she wouldn't. Maybe I just needed to get what I saw that night instantly off my chest, and telling my mom would be the best way to do it, without facing ridicule from my friends, being laughed at by my sister, or simply just being ignored by my dad. As unbelievable as this story that I told my mom was, I knew what I saw that night was real, and I think most people on this planet know when they are dreaming and when they are not, and I just knew I wasn't. If this was the case, then what I saw from my bedroom window that night was indeed a flying saucer, a UFO. It may then come as a surprise to whoever is listening to this, as it did for me, to learn that despite bearing witness to what appeared to be an unforgettable UFO experience, I had almost completely forgotten about what happened that night, not fully recollecting what I saw until the latter part of last year. Was I in denial about what I saw? Did my mind just choose to repress the memory of it? When I first wrote about this experience recently, an online user speculated that my young brain couldn't comprehend what I had seen and therefore repressed the entire memory. But, like I have already said, this would not be my only potential UFO encounter. And the next time, thankfully, I wouldn't be alone. During the summer of 2012, having just graduated primary school, my 6 friends and I ventured almost every day to the exact same place along the outskirts of town. We had found a field with a small adjoining wooded area, and very quickly, this area became our brand new den, where we spent most days climbing trees or playing tag hide and seek. At the very end of our den was a 4-foot wide creek, separating the field we played in from the town's rugby club that was also on the outskirts of town. The reason I bring up this creek is because my friends and I, upon discovering it, would also spend a lot of our time there that summer. We enjoyed playing this juvenile game where one of us had to leap over to the embankment on the other side or cross via a narrow wooden plank we found to make a bridge. Being the attention seeker I was at that age, I was always willing to jump up and over to the other side. In fact, I was the best. Anyone else who tried mostly ended up with 1 foot in the less than sanitary water. Several months later, however, and nearly halfway through our first year of secondary school, our tradition of jumping creeks and playing field hide and seek had sadly become far less frequent with the ongoing school year. That was until one afternoon, or maybe it was evening, I don't remember, my friends and I ventured back to our den in the nearby creek, crossing over and entering behind the grounds of the rugby club. These grounds consisted of 2 large rugby fields and a smaller patch of grass by the side, which is where the creek had led us. What the 5 or 6 of us were doing there, I'm not sure. We did sometimes use the grounds to play tag or hide and seek, or other times we just explored, but what I remember next from that afternoon/evening, in whichever autumn month it was we caught sight of something flying in the not too distant sky, and heading directly our way. At first, we must have thought it was nothing more than an airplane or Royal Air Force craft, as our town had them passing the sky on a regular basis. The closer this thing got, however, the more it started to look like something else, something none of us had probably ever seen before. It began to resemble what our youthful, imaginative minds could only perceive as an alien spacecraft, so much so that one of my friends remarked, "Is that a UFO?" as if voicing the thoughts of all of us. Whatever this thing was, it was still coming our way and flying curiously low. As close as it was now, I think we were all waiting for this craft to visually clarify for us that it was some kind of plane. But what I can still remember vividly is this thing being directly over our heads. And my next thought while looking up to it was, that is a UFO. An alien spaceship. Before any other thought could then enter my mind, whether it be one of awe, dread, or panic, I hear one of my friends a meter or two behind me shout, "Shit." When I look behind me, I see all of my friends running towards the creek's embankment as if they are fleeing for their lives. If I recall, it was just me and my friend George who didn't. I'm sure I thought of running too, but I must have been in such awe or disbelief at what I was seeing, and even if I did run, I thought it was sure to abduct me. Whether I ran or stood right where I was, I felt convinced there was nothing I could really do. If it was going to take me, it would. When I turned away from my friends to look back up at what I initially thought was an alien craft, I instead saw a low-flying military jet that was now slightly turned away from us and flying off. My friends also must have noticed it was just a military jet, as they had stopped running and now joined slowly back with the rest of the group, realizing there was nothing to be afraid of anymore. Although my memory of the following conversation is hazy, we did discuss what we had just seen, with every one of us indeed thinking it was a UFO at first, only to then realize it was a military jet. I don't remember the conversation going any further from there, or what we even did afterwards for that matter. We probably just went back into town and played football at the park. However, something I discreetly remember to this day is that in the next 2 years that I still knew them, before packing up my things and moving abroad with my family, not a single one of us ever talked about the experience again. Not even for a laugh. There was no remember when we all thought we saw a UFO, but it was really just a plane? I did drift away from most of these friends by the following year, as we were all in separate classes in school and played for rival football teams, so perhaps they did talk about the experience, except without me there. In my last year before moving abroad, however, I did reacquaint myself with my best friend Kai, who was there that day at the rugby club. We took drama class together that year, where we learned about scary urban legends that we later performed. It was also from these lessons that Kai and I became obsessed with urban legends, so much so that we would watch scary YouTube videos about them. But in that same year, enjoying being scared together, not once, to my recollection, did either of us ever bring up that experience at the rugby club. Not once. Kai was one of my friends I saw run away that day, so he was obviously scared by the craft as well. But I never brought it up either. In fact, I think I almost forgot about the experience altogether, just like my first experience a year prior to it. But what's even crazier to me is that I seem to forget about both of these experiences, regardless of what they were. For the next 10 years. If you're wondering why I am talking about this second experience, even though it only turned out to be a military jet, it's because since recollecting my first experience recently and becoming acquainted with UFO lore and history, some things about that day at the rugby club just don't seem to add up to me. Number 1, if this was an RAF jet, then it was flying dangerously low, potentially 100 to 160 feet above us. From what I've researched, RAF jets can fly as low as 100 feet, but when it comes to populated areas containing vehicles and civilians, then they can go no lower than 500 feet. If this was a jet, it may not have even seen my friends and me, but it was still flying in and around a populated town. Number 2, I was 100% convinced that this craft flying over me was an alien craft, 100 feet or so above me, and that is what I believed I was seeing. It was only when I looked at my friends running away and then back again that I realized it was somehow now a military jet. Number 3, and perhaps the most confusing aspect of this experience is that the RAF jet, from my recollection, made barely any noise. From what I've read, RAF jets at only 25 meters after takeoff are so loud, they can rupture your eardrums. As I mentioned, this jet was no more than 160 feet above us, yet I could still hear my friend curse the S word behind me. Having recently delved into the realm of UFOs in the past year, I came across a video, whether genuine or a hoax, depicting a spinning, bright glowing light in the clear day sky that gradually transformed into a standard airliner. Although in the video, this transition took the better part of a minute, I then wondered if the craft I saw that day could possibly have done the same thing. However, when I previously shared my experiences online, only several months ago, one person rationally suggested that the craft I saw could have in fact been the Avro Vulcan XH-558, which was active in 2012 and based at Doncaster Sheffield Airport, not that far from Goole. The Avro Vulcan is indeed a very odd-looking military craft, with wings resembling something like you would see out of Star Trek. Maybe that's why it was called the Avro Vulcan? From what I remember, In the few seconds that I fully believed this thing flying over me to be a UFO, it didn't strike me as flying saucer shaped, not like the one I had seen a year before. Regardless, whatever this craft was, it definitely struck me as alien at first, and maybe what I thought I was seeing was a different kind of alien craft. Or maybe it really was just a military jet. An oddly shaped one at that. If you were to ask me now, in the year 2024, if what I saw in 2012 was either a UFO or simply an RAF jet, for the sake of rationality, I would say it was just a jet, whose strange appearance merely confused a group of 12-year-old boys. However, to conclude the speculation of this second experience, I will leave you with this. Not long after sharing my experiences, an online user advised me to share my story with a specific UFO investigator, who particularly focuses on UFO activity in the Yorkshire area. Feeling in need of answers, I emailed this very same investigator. Intrigued by my story, he requested a conversation over the phone with me, and after relaying this second experience with him, highlighting how this jet was supposedly flying dangerously low, without producing much sound at all, he simply said to me, "That wasn't a military craft." If you were to ask me whether I believe in aliens, my answer would be yes. Not because of what I saw, I still don't know if what I saw was real. I do believe in aliens, or whatever they are. There are countless theories, simply because since I first fell down this UFO rabbit hole, learning of the experiences of many others, the existence of extraterrestrials no longer appears irrational to me. After all, can we really be the only intelligent beings to exist in this universe? The answer is I don't know. But what I do know is that for me, like it will be for countless others, the truth is still out there somewhere. Maybe even right here on our very own planet.